Trusted, credible, nonpartisan. The Hill's unbiased news and analysis on policy and politics is delivered straight to the halls of Congress with unparalleled engagement in the Beltway and beyond. A new administration, a new Congress, and a new position on the energy and the environment. From enterprise reporting to breaking news to live events, The Hill stays on the pulse of what's next. Welcome to The Hill's Energy and Environment Summit.
Please welcome to the stage Bill Sammon, Senior Vice President of Editorial Content at The Hill.
Thank you so much. Good morning and welcome to The Hill's Energy and Environment Summit. I am Bill Sammon. I'm the SVP of Editorial Content at The Hill. And I'm understandably proud of our nonpartisan coverage, which hopefully you'll get a chance to see here firsthand today. You know, it's been, I think, 107 days since President Trump, on his first day in office, signed an executive order titled Unleashing American Energy. And in the 107 days that have ensued, he's done a lot of other stuff, too, when it comes to energy and environment. Let me just read a partial list here. Declared a national emergency, exited the Paris agreements, established a National Energy Dominance Council, reduced regulations on emissions, reduced subsidies for alternative energy sources, and of course ramped up fossil fuel production, also known as drill baby drill. I haven't even mentioned the tariffs and a lot of other stuff, but I think the question before us today is, what do all of these things taken together mean for the future of America's energy outlook? And what do they mean? What is their impact on the global climate governance landscape, if you will? These are complicated questions. Fortunately for all of us today, we have just the right mix of lawmakers and energy experts and environmental specialists to make sense of it all. Now, we also have some very important movers and shakers in this room today. So I would simply ask if you, and some of us I'm sure are expecting very important phone calls at various times, if you could please put your phones on silent mode. And if you do need to leave the room for whatever reason before our first scheduled coffee break, of course, if you could do that between our sessions and also being mindful of the fact that we are going to be live streaming this to tens of thousands of people who I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome now. So if you're watching on our live stream, if you're here in the audience, you can follow along on social media with the hashtag #TheHillEnergy. And I would be remiss at this point if I didn't thank our sponsor, Climate Power, for their generous support in making today's program possible. You know, today's interviews are going to be moderated by a couple of folks, including my old pal, Mike Vaquera, who is the DC Bureau Chief of News Nation, as well as Rachel Frazen, who is the Hill's Energy and Environment reporter. By the way, Rachel and another Hill reporter, Sharon Udison, recently published a book on forever chemicals called Poisoning the Well. So congrats to the authors, Rachel and Sharon. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mike Vaquera. Some people call him Mike, some people call him Vic. I call him a great guy and an even greater journalist. So let's show some love for Mike Vaquera.
Oh, hi, Bill.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks very much, Bill, and thanks to all of you for being here in this beautiful, ornate setting. I was just told outside the Mayflower Hotel celebrating 100 years this year. So that's thrilling for a local Washingtonian, such as I am. You just heard Bill sort of run down the climate environment, political and policy environment that we're in right now. And we do have some very relevant and heavy hitter speakers here and some influential people that we're going to be chatting with over the course of this morning. Wildfires are getting deadlier, costlier, thanks to climate change. EPA shifts. These are some of the headlines, incidentally, from the Hill newspaper this morning. And we do still put out a print version of this paper when Congress is in, maybe a couple of times a week. Some of the headlines: wildfires getting deadlier and costlier thanks to climate change. EPA shifts scientists towards approving new chemicals and hints at future staff cuts is another article you'll find here. And 5 ways Trump reshaped energy and environment policy in his first 100 days, some issues I know that many of you are intimately familiar with. But anyway, I encourage you to pick up the Hill or go online and read some of these articles. So in his address to the joint session of Congress that we heard just recently and Bill referred to, President Trump vowed to rapidly ramp up fossil fuel and mineral production, all as he promised with that now familiar refrain of drill, baby, drill. And I remember when I was covering the House 20 years ago, a man named Mike Pence led sort of a rump takeover. Republicans on the floor during a recess chanting drill, baby, drill, and they refused to leave, I think for days on end. So this is a now familiar policy goal, a familiar refrain from Republicans. But let's hear directly from the president himself.
A major focus of our fight to defeat inflation is rapidly reducing the cost of energy. The previous administration cut the number of new oil and gas leases by 95%, slowed pipeline construction to a halt, and closed more than 100 power plants. We are opening up many of those power plants right now. And frankly, we have never seen anything like it. That's why on my first day in office, I declared a national energy emergency. As you've heard me say many times, we have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth, and by far. And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it. It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
So that sets the stage for policy and politics as we embark on this morning of discussion about some of the issues that I know are very near and dear to all of you. So without further ado, please welcome Congressman Randy Weber. The congressman is a Republican from Texas. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where he's vice chair of the Subcommittee on Energy, if I have that right, and on the Science Committee, where you're chairman of the Subcommittee on Energy. Congressman, welcome. You can climb up here? All right. Good to see you. Well, Congressman, there's a lot to talk about. Loving these boots. What are they made of?
Alligator.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Now, your district is south of Houston in that area.
It is.
Pearland?
Pearland.
Pearland, I'm sorry.
That's all right. You're from the north.
I'm from the DMV, yeah.
Absolutely. You can always tell a Texan, you just can't tell him much. But I'm the upper Gulf Coast of Texas. We start at the Louisiana line, that other foreign country. And we go down the curve, 4 counties. We have 7 ports, Mike. We got more than any other member of Congress. Some have 4. We have 7. Just a little background about the district. We produce 65% of the nation's jet fuel, 80% of the nation's military-grade fuel, about 20% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. My 7 ports don't include the Port of Houston. If you go up to the Galveston Bay, how many of y'all been to Galveston? Some of y'all been to. We want y'all to come back and spend lots of money.
Yeah.
But if you include the Port of Houston, which comes up to Galveston,
sure.
It's 8 ports. Now it's like 40% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. It's still 80% of the nation's military-grade fuel, and it's 75 to 80% of the nation's LNG. So we are energy.
Energy. You're also trade with those ports as well.
We are.
Yeah,
sure.
So the Energy and Commerce Committee is the right place for you to be.
Well, I think so.
Yeah, and there's a lot on the table these days heading into the session.
I haven't heard.
Yeah, especially heading in the next couple of weeks when the big, beautiful bill, quote unquote, is being considered. A lot of implications for your district and districts around the country,
sure.
as well as with the president's policies, and let's get into that right now. Let's start with how you would evaluate the last 3 months, major policy shifts, major shifts in politics on energy and environment.
Well, America moves on energy. Am I done?
Yeah, that's your out cue.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman.
You're very welcome. So America moves on energy. Now, our enemies across the world, they don't care about standards for pollution or air quality or none of that kind of stuff. We do. I think Republicans get beat up sometimes because they think you don't care about the climate or you don't care. That's not true. I've got 3 kids. Where's Rachel? Rachel, where'd you land? I was talking to her earlier. I was telling them I've got 3 kids. She's back over here. I'm surprised she'll admit she knows me. We've got 3 kids, all girls except 2 boys. And you'll catch that later. And
sorry.
8 grandkids and 2 great-granddaughters. We want a clean environment. We want pollution-free as much as possible. But we've also got to produce energy for Americans. Everything, oil, petroleum, basically everything you touch or use, notebooks, boots included, they all have a lot of petroleum background to them, okay? Our enemies across the world don't care about that. They're going to produce oil at the cheapest they can, whether it affects the economy, whether it affects their pollution or their children, they don't care. We care in America. I'm a grandfather, we care. So it's important to us what we're doing. Produce that energy, produce it cleanly. We've got to get where we have enough energy that we don't rely on Russia. We can talk about uranium too, for that matter. Where we don't rely on Venezuela, where we produce all of our energy here.
You often highlight the importance, as you sort of just touched on then, of reliable and affordable energy. How do you balance that with growing concerns about another thing you just touched on? Well, I'm not sure if you would stipulate to climate-driven weather events and the need for long-term environmental resilience.
Everybody, I think, is really, they ought to be cognizant of and thinking about a clean environment. And I'm not a meteorologist, but that you hear what these guys talk about. They had an ice age back, glaciers were melting 20,000 years ago, whatever it is.
Right.
So I don't know. Yogi Berra once said, the problem with predicting is you're dealing with the future. So will the ice be melting again? Will we see sea level rise? Will we see storms more and more and more? Will they subside in 6 years, 10 years, 30 years, 150 years? Who knows? All we know now is the present now, where we can produce that energy the cleanest that we possibly can, keeping in mind that there's enemies out there that would love to kill us, literally love to kill us.
Clean energy. Give me an example of clean energy in your mind.
Well, clean energy for us, of course, EVs are good. Now you're seeing the tax
EVs
credits.
are good.
EVs are absolutely, they're good. You betcha. EVs are good. They're going to have to start paying some more tax because, for one thing, they had credits, where they got rebates.
Sure.
They don't pay a gasoline tax. Some of y'all may not have thought about that. I'm told they have heavier rubber tires, which means more wear and tear on the highway.
They're heavier cars overall.
They're heavier cars, absolutely. When I was on Transportation Infrastructure Committee, we talked about a bill to increase the number of vehicles that those big 18-wheelers could carry to include EVs, which weigh more, so that they could get more into the car dealerships at a cheaper, lower rate without having to have another 18-wheeler on the highway, more expulsion of gases, for example. So that's one way, EVs. When you want clean energy, natural gas is clean energy. And folks, nuclear is clean energy. I was in the Texas House for 4 years before I got demoted to Congress, and I had South Texas Nuclear Project in my district there in Matagorda County. I have been there in 2010 with staff and watched them change out spent nuclear fuel rods with our own eyes. It's fascinating to see what they do. They can do it cleanly, they can do it safely. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no cleaner energy than nuclear energy, okay? And it's reliable. Solar's not, wind is not near as reliable as nuclear. It's been 30 years since a new nuclear plant, Vogtle,
right,
has been done. We have 2 in Texas, Comanche Peak and South Texas Nuclear Project. STP was in the process of getting units 3 and 4 on the board with the NRC when Fukushima happened in Japan in 2011. Mm-hmm. And their investors drew back, from Japan and decided not to go with units 3 and 4. Clean energy is just that. It is wind, it is solar. Some of y'all know Texas is the #1 wind energy state in the country. The #1 solar panel state in the country. I was in the Texas House when we spent, I think it was $8 billion to move power lines, transmission lines from West Texas down to the grid, into the grid, so that we could have wind energy. The Texas legislature was very, very futuristic in that regard.
I'm going to drill down on what's on the table in these coming weeks. This is a big, important bill, this reconciliation bill, what the president calls this big, beautiful bill. And some of the policy goals that Republicans have And I realize, like Democrats, Republicans aren't completely unified on some of what
I hadn't heard.
what's going to be happening over the course of the last weeks, but it's going to have impacts, across American society, across the American economy. You've championed, for example, modernizing pipeline infrastructure through the Next Generation Pipeline R&D Act. What gaps in our current energy transport systems and supply chains, if you will, are most urgently in need of renovation and reform?
Well, permitting is number one. There's no LNG, like LNG people said, companies would come into our office there here in DC and say that they could build an LNG plant, whether it's 3 billion, 7 billion, 12 billion, in about 2 to 3 years. It would take them to get the permit, sometimes 5 or 6 years, and their investors get really nervous. And what happens to the price of money the longer you have to hold on to it? It goes up. Pardon me. So that affects the price, for example. You remember the Keystone Pipeline. I'll give you an example. I talked about 18-wheelers on the highway.
Yeah.
The Keystone Pipeline, which, and I talked to President Obama, to his credit, when he came into office 2009. Actually, I came in 2012 when he was reelected. He came, to his credit, he came and spoke at the Republican conference. I got to meet him personally and introduced myself to him, thanked him for being there. Said, look, you're thinking about the Keystone Pipeline. It comes into my district and the Gulf Coast of Texas. We'd love to see that permit, get approved. And he says, well, I'm thinking about it. Of course, ultimately, he did not approve it. It carries 830,000 barrels of product a day, oil. If you used an 18-wheeler, a tanker, some of y'all have seen, we see tankers on the highway all the time in Texas, a big 18-wheeler long tank, 7,000 gallons or 9,000 gallons, it depends on which one it is. If you wanted to carry that many barrels of oil a day, it would take 5,000 tankers on the highway every day to match the Keystone Pipeline. Don't we care about diesel exhausts? So we want pipeline permitting reformed. We want it as quickly as possible.
All right, let me ask you this then. Is that something that Congress has to get done or the president can do through executive order?
Well, it depends on how it's done. I think a lot of these, you're seeing him combine some of these things with the Department of Energy.
Because there was an EO on permitting reform.
Say that again?
There was an executive order on permitting.
There was. You're seeing him combine some of these agencies in doing that. If he can reduce those times, if it doesn't violate any of our laws that we've passed, if he can get it done that quickly, sure, absolutely, let's get that done. Time is of the essence. We've got a $36 trillion plus deficit. How many of y'all could operate, at home if you had, choose a number, $1 million deficit and you were having to pay your charge card interest on it at 20%? You wouldn't last very long.
Just taking a step back and look at the bigger picture, what are you're on the Energy Commerce Committee, you're on the Science Committee and the Subcommittee Chair on Energy. What are your top legislative priorities in the short term here and in the longer term?
Well, energy is number one, pipeline research. Excuse me. Pipelines so that we get them a lot cleaner, safer, more efficient, and quicker so we can move product around. And then, of course, people are trying to say we're trying to do away with Medicaid and Medicare. That's not correct. Texas is one of the few states, I forget there was 8 or 10 of them, that didn't take Medicaid expansion under Obama. And so what we're seeing is that there are some able-bodied young male adults that are on Medicaid who ought to be out getting a job or ought to be going into the exchanges. There's no reason the federal government should be sending money to the states to pay for somebody, and I don't mean to be sexist about it, it can be able-bodied young females as well, who just want to be on Medicaid because they don't want to have to pay for their health insurance. I've got kids, I've got grandkids, did I mention that we pay for our own health insurance? And so the states need to be more responsible. We need to trim Medicaid. I happen to know a FBI agent very up close and personal, and he works in the financial service. He says the American public would be unbelievably upset if they found out all the waste, fraud, and abuse that's in Medicaid, and Medicare for that matter, but we're just talking Medicaid. So you're seeing us talk about cutting back 1% maybe. Now, this is all up in the air. We're tasked with $880 billion with the B dollars.
On Energy and Commerce.
On Energy and Commerce Committee. And so we're meeting regularly, sometimes to 8 and 9 o'clock at night to have that discussion. Ways and Means is waiting on us because there's some overlap there. Right. They want to see what we're going to do.
Well, I don't want to get too far off topic, but this very day there was going to be a markup in Energy and Commerce that was originally scheduled. What happened?
It got pulled.
And why was that?
Well, we're not far enough down the road.
Yeah.
And there's some disagreement. Look, I mean, Republicans have disagreements too. And, you know, we try not to have them, you know, vile, if you will, name calling and, you know, hair pulling and all that kind of stuff out in public. But we have disagreements on about how to get there. So we're working on that.
Okay. The administration, we talked about a little bit about the EOs, the executive orders aimed at preempting state-level climate change initiatives. What do you make of that, and what role should the federal government play over state authority when setting some of these regulations on energy and environment?
Have you read the 10th Amendment?
Yes.
Okay. All power is not delegated to the United States government should go to the state.
Right. But yet the president is issuing these from the federal level.
Oh, sure, I get that, because he feels like they've done a big number on energy. Did I mention America runs on energy? And
You have indeed.
Cleaner,
Yes.
sooner, more cost-effective energy. So I think that it really goes back to, I'll go back to the second question, the one we just visited about Medicaid.
Yes.
You know, states can make their laws, regulations for Medicaid. I think states can make their laws too. If California wants to say you can't buy gasoline vehicles anymore after a while, that's up to California. They don't want to affect their, you know, climate, so to speak. If Texas wants to do that, they can do it. So let the states determine what they want to do as much as humanly possible. Otherwise, we're paying money to regulate states that the states ought to be doing themselves.
How does Texas's energy economy shape your I mean, you've already outlined the extensive links and ties that your district has to energy. How does the economy shape your approach to national energy policy, and what can other states learn from that?
Oh, that's a loaded question. As I said earlier, you can always tell a Texan. You know, I think we get it right. You know, Texas's economy is so big that if we were a country, we'd be the 8th largest country. And California's, in full disclosure, is big too. They're bigger than we are.
I think they're 7. Or I might have that wrong.
No, I think it's 4th. I heard the other day.
All right.
I'm getting a lot of head shakes here. Yeah. So usually I get eye rolls. So head shakes is a lot better. Yeah. But I think, you know, what Texas has learned, and, you know, Texas is a big state. Alaska likes to brag that the 3 Texas would fit inside Alaska. I guess that's their call to fame. But we have every single weather phenomenon there is. We have hurricanes, tornadoes, sandstorms, snow, ice. What am I missing? Some small earthquakes. And so Texas is very much aware of their weather, reforms, anything they want to do for weather programs. I think other states could say, look, you can produce things cleanly. If really, and I know this is a little bit hokey, if you give people their head, they used to say, if there's any ranchers here, give a horse its head. If you let people try to do the right thing, for the most part, they're going to do it. They're going to figure out and do the right thing. If the federal government steps in the way and tries to regulate them, then they're going to want more money. I think Texas has enough freedom behind it in the way that it came to be as a state, that they pretty much let industry do the things. You know, the Environmental Reg Committee I was on when I was in the Texas House, TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, is Texas's branch, if you will, or model after, not model, but after the EPA. They let Texas companies do as much as possible. They don't go out there and slap big fines on them. They don't go out there and tell them you can't do this, and it's going to be 2 or 3 years before you can do this. They work efficiently and effectively. Let the government, when it comes to energy, if you're a state, you want to follow Texas, work efficiently and quickly as possible. People will do the right things for the most part.
You have supported in the past bipartisan legislation, R&D legislation. So where do you see opportunities moving forward? You know, it's become almost a cliche, sort of a bitter cliche, that Washington is more polarized than ever, and certainly it is polarized. Mm-hmm. But where do you see opportunities for Republicans and Democrats to work together on many of these issues?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Some of y'all probably know who Aspen Institute is.
Sure.
Get some more head shakes. Mm-hmm. So we've been in many meetings with Aspen Institute, and just recently we were over in Italy, and we had 17 members of Congress. We had 9 Democrats and 8 Republicans. Have I got that math right? 17 members. And so we're working together on energy. We're seeing a lot of getting together on these kinds of regulations. Now, in full disclosure, a lot of the Democrats don't like President Trump's methods. You know, they don't like what he's doing with executive orders, for example. But in terms of energy and knowing which way we need to move and head that way, we're getting some collaboration.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes left, so I want to go through the lightning round.
Okay.
If I could. All right, so if you had a magic wand, if you had a silver bullet, whatever, take your pick, pixie dust.
Sure.
Cut through all the red tape, cut through all the politics to pass one energy-related bill tomorrow, what would it be?
Well, it would be a big bill. So, how many of these do you want to cover? But we need to be, Germany learned about nuclear the hard way. France reprocesses their nuclear waste more than we do. We could do the same thing. We could use an all of the above bill, which says, look, make the permitting good, whether it's nuclear, whether it's wind, solar, whether no matter what the source is, natural gas. Let's make sure that the permitting is streamlined. Let's make sure that it's clean as much as possible. Give these companies, as the old Texas horse saying, their head, as I said earlier, because they'll go out there and do the right thing. We will monitor it. We'll make sure that there's no cheating, for example. We don't want them doing things, trying to cover things up that affect our environment, that they give, employees a good, solid job, good pay. Not that we have the right to set standards and pay in Texas. We don't have a lot of unions in Texas. Mm-hmm. Pretty much let those companies choose their rate and prevailing wage. And listen, while we're on that subject, a kid can come out of high school, 18, 19 years old, and where we have all these refineries and stuff, they can go into work for those refineries. No drug history, no drug record. They can be with some secondary post-education, some a little bit, they can be making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. Throw in some overtime, they can make $100,000 a year, a kid. All the benefits, insurance, paid vacations, retirement. A kid fresh out of high school, $100,000 a year. That's a good salary.
All right, a final question. I want to bring it back to the people that you represent in Pearland and elsewhere.
Right.
What do you hear from constituents about some of these issues? On energy, are they more concerned about affordability, jobs, climate impacts, or reliability on the energy supply?
Well, you're missing one thing. I don't hear a lot of unhappiness. I hear some concern. Texas is a big energy state. There's a shock, And so we're hearing people that, look, we're appreciating all the move to get energy more affordable, and let's get it going as quickly as we can, including nuclear. Tariffs is what I've heard more about.
Really?
We want to be sure that, and look, we know what the goal here is. We don't want China to be able to charge us stuff so that high tariffs so that we buy their products, but they don't buy their products.
Sure.
And look, how many of y'all were around when Walmart started, 60s or so, 70s? They used to have a slogan. Walmart's slogan was made in the USA. Have y'all remember that slogan? Some of y'all remember that. You don't see that anymore. And so tariffs has been probably more the thing they're concerned about. But I think President Trump is onto this. He knows exactly what to do. He's going to force those countries to come to the table, and let's have a negotiation, and let's get this back on track.
Well, Congressman Weber, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Senator Ed Markey, everybody.
When Trump says he wants to end the Green New Deal, he wants to end union battery manufacturing jobs in Ohio. He wants to end rebates that help American families afford new air conditioners and heaters. He wants to keep school districts from getting clean buses to take kids to school. He wants to end programs that help our communities rebuild after a disaster, such as the fires in Los Angeles or the hurricanes that devastated Georgia and North Carolina. But here's the truth. Trump can't get rid of the Green New Deal because there is no stopping a mobilization in a movement once it is galvanized. The Green New Deal doesn't stop until the climate crisis stops. The Green New Deal doesn't stop until fossil fuel billionaires stop lining their pockets while our cities burn to the ground.
Well, there he was up there. Here he is right here. Senator Ed Markey. I've got an intro for you, so I'm going to read it. Come hell or high water here. Welcome to the stage, our next guest, Senator Ed Markey, an environmental and energy steward, author of the Green New Deal. He's also co-chair of the Senate Climate Change Task Force and a member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Long ago and far away, I worked as a reporter in the House of Representatives when Mr. Markey was a member of the House and now is up on Mount Olympus in the Senate. So it's good to see you, sir.
No, great to be with you again.
Alrighty. So where do we begin? Well, let's start with your recent report on extreme weather. What can you tell us about your report and its findings?
Well, last year there were 26 storms that caused, or climate-related weather events that caused over $1 billion worth of damage. And that number just keeps going up and up and up. Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene alone last year, just those two events, caused $300 billion worth of damage. The fires in LA caused $135 billion worth of damage. So that's $435 billion in damage just related to 3 events in the very recent past. And it's only getting worse. It's only intensifying. The planet is running a fever. There are no emergency rooms for planets, so we have to engage in preventative care. And meanwhile, Trump is proposing to cut the FEMA budget, to cut the NOAA budget, which is the early warning system for what is happening. So it's the world upside down, where reality is making it very clear that the danger is only increasing, that the flooding, the fires, the intensity of the storms are only growing, and yet Trump and his MAGA minions live in a world of denial that ultimately is going to come back to haunt the lives of ordinary families, ordinary businesses all across this country, and by the way, all across the world, because we should be the world leader.
You co-chair, as we mentioned, the Senate Climate Task Force that aims to elevate climate policy in the minds of many Americans and American voters. So what specific outcomes are you hoping to achieve through this organization?
Well, the goal obviously is to put a focus on what Trump is trying to do. The natural gas and oil and coal industries are in a panic. The 2022 IRA, Joe Manchin got naming rights to that because he gave us his vote, so it's called the IRA. I would have called it the biggest climate bill in the history of the world. So just in the last 3 years, there's been $400 billion worth of investment that came out of that bill. 400,000 new jobs that have been created. And last year, 2024, 94% of all new installed electrical generation capacity in the United States was wind, solar, or battery. 94%. If you're the natural gas industry, you can't allow that to happen for the next 10 years in a row, because that says that it's very clear people don't need more natural gas. And that's why the Trump administration is trying to kill offshore wind all along the east coast of our country. Why they've made it very clear that they want to destroy the tax breaks for wind and solar and battery storage technologies. It's why they want to make sure that it's hard to put charging stations across this country for all electric vehicles, because the oil industry is threatened by the rapid increase in the deployment of all electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and we put 70% of the oil which we consume in the United States into gasoline tanks. So they have to kill this, which is why they gave so many tens of millions of dollars to Trump. It is not oil above, it's not all of the above, it's oil above all. It's gas above all. They have to kill the competition. After 100 years of them having the tax breaks, finally the competition gets the tax breaks, it's working, and they are petrified because it's an existential threat to their business model.
We just heard a conservative Republican from Texas and from an energy producing district, Congressman Weber, say that EVs were, popular, and he was not trying to eliminate EVs from the roadways. It sort of raises a question in my mind.
He may not be, but Trump is.
Right.
I mean, it's not him. It's Trump.
Well,
it's Chris Wright. It's his entire. It's Lee Zeldin. It's this cartel. I mean, Trump didn't appoint a cabinet. He appointed a cartel to try to advance the oil, gas, and coal industry agenda. So he may say that he likes EVs, but that's not, in fact, what the policy is of the Trump administration. They're coming for that industry.
Well, you sort of alluded to the IRA and the billions of dollars that were dedicated to some of this renewable energy and EV tax credits and the like. Hearing Congressman Weber, it occurs to me that some of this stuff is irreversible, in that the public is more largely accepting electric vehicles, for example. What's your view? What's your take on that?
Well, they are accepting it. What they're trying to do, that is the Trump administration, the oil and gas industry, is they're trying to slow it down. They want to buy more time at the other end. Eventually, inevitably, inexorably, yes, we're going to move to wind and solar. We're going to move to all electric vehicles. We're moving to a smart grid. We're moving to all those things. But they want it to occur in 2050, 2060, 2070.
You stipulate that they want it to occur at all.
They don't want it to occur at all. They want to protect their business model. And their business model is keeping America and the world addicted to fossil fuels. So what they're attempting to do is to also have a free pass for drilling for oil and gas in our country, and then to export it around the world, to keep the rest of the world addicted as well, rather than being the leader saying, no, we should be moving to renewable energy resources totally in Europe and other parts of the world. Instead, they are trying to kill that innovation in our country. And by the way, they can't kill it totally because China last month announced that they have a new charging capacity that they can recharge a battery in a car in 5 minutes. So it's not going to go away. It's just that the United States' role in it is going to go away if Trump has his way. In the same way that his cuts in NIH funding for research for Alzheimer's and diabetes, if you slash that, we might as well put a bow on top of the gift package to China, handing over the clean energy industry and the biotech industry to them. So this is just absolute economic suicide that he is trying to create for our country, because there is a future that the rest of the world is embracing and the United States is going to be left out.
Let me ask you in the immediate short term here, because really the Congress now is consumed in what could be considered sort of the Super Bowl of policy and political debate in the reconciliation bill, in the budget bill. What are your goals? What are you trying to promote? What are you trying to stop from happening as the Congress considers this major piece of legislation that really may be the president's last bite at the apple to enact his energy and environment reforms, his permitting reforms, his regulation reforms, given that the midterms, who knows which way that's going to go?
Well, we have to do the job in just explaining to Republicans that 80% of the IRA funding went to red and purple states, not to blue states. The jobs are there for them. They've already been created, and there's many, many, many more in place. It's their future in manufacturing. It's their future in the energy future of our country. So we have work to do. Not that those congressmen and senators aren't already hearing it from their governors, aren't already hearing it from their local mayors, where those plants have already been constructed, or the plan is in place for the construction of the battery facilities, of the all-electric vehicle facilities, for the solar panels to be constructed. So this is not going to be necessarily a cakewalk for the White House. There's already been 20 Republican House members who have written a letter to the president saying, we're not all on board on cutting out all of these tax subsidies that have led to new job creation in our state, new manufacturing capacity. So there's going to be resistance amongst Republicans because ultimately we're elected to represent our local states. And Congress is a stimulus response institution. You know this one.
Sure.
And there's nothing more stimulating than your local mayors and governors calling you to say, what are you doing? You're ruining a plan that we had in our state to become the leader in batteries or solar panel or all-electric vehicle manufacturer. And they have a very narrow margin in the House, sure, especially, and in the Senate, to be able to pull off this attempt to completely obliterate the clean energy revolution.
Talk a little bit about executive orders and the power of the Congress and the legislature versus the power of the executive. With the Supreme Court reconsidering a lot of these issues around federal agency authorities, how concerned are you about the EPA's ability to regulate emissions efficiently and effectively over the next several years?
Well, obviously, Lee Zeldin at the EPA is a disaster. He has absolutely committed himself to making the EPA stand for every polluter's ally. That's his goal. That's his mantra. But ultimately, the courts determine what is constitutional. That's Marbury versus Madison. That's the first case you learn in your first week in law school.
I think I learned it in high school, actually.
In high school. You went to a better high school than me. But in law school, the courts determine what's constitutional. Not the Congress, not the presidency. What they've been under a misimpression for the first 100 days is that Article 1 is the Congress, Article 2 is the President, Article 3 is the Supreme Court. They believe there's an Article 3.5 of the Muskocracy, where the Muskocracy overrides all other parts of the Constitution. But of course, what we've seen across the board is case after case after case after case of the federal courts just saying, no, stop. We're going to force you to relitigate this. For example, that's happening with Zeldin's order and the U.S. Attorney here in Massachusetts, in the District of Columbia's order to kill the Green Bank. The Green Bank is something that I created with Chris Van Hollen and Debbie Dingell, which is $20 billion in a green bank, which then, according to Goldman and others, will unleash $250 billion worth of private sector investment. Well, they said to the criminal division here in Washington, D.C., U.S. Attorney's Office, find a crime in the bank. The head of the criminal division was forced to step aside because she said she couldn't find it. And the judge in the case looked down and said, I don't believe you're telling me the truth. So they're committed to undermining these regulations, undermining these funding sources. So far, the courts have held. Ultimately, it will go up to the Supreme Court, many of these issues. But their capacity to accomplish this in the short run, in trying to slow down grants and depopulating the agencies themselves, no question about it. It can be effective in the short run. But as long as the courts hold, as long as these regulations, as long as the congressional funding stays in place, in the long run, we will continue to see the revolution.
I'm going to try to shift to a bipartisan focus here. So the question is, how can the federal government accelerate permitting reform for clean energy projects without compromising environmental protections or community input, for that matter?
And that's the big question. How do we strike that balance?
Yeah.
And ultimately, last year, as I said, 94% of all new electrical generating capacity installed in our country was wind and solar and battery storage technology. So it was already up to 94% last year. So yeah, we can look at permitting reform. We can try to accelerate it somewhat. But at the same time, we do have to be concerned about the underlying constitution of the environment, the 1970 National Environmental Policy Act. We have to make sure that people are heard in the local communities. You just can't run roughshod over communities. That's how you wind up with environmental injustice, because it's always the poorest communities, it's always the most vulnerable communities that somehow or other have their rights, which are truncated. So there's a balance to be struck, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has a lot of inherent authority to be able to move. My hope is that they do, but also respecting the rights of communities to be heard.
Okay. We have 35 seconds left, but you can go over. You were always one of the most media-savvy members of the House when you were in the House. I do remember that about you. So please help us end this interview on a hopeful note. What are you most hopeful for as it relates to the environment, environmental policy, and everything that the Congress is doing and the executive around these issues?
Young people. You know, when I introduced the Green New Deal with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it unleashed a wave of young people in middle schools, high schools, colleges, all across this country. It created a movement that moved right into the 2020 election, which then had almost a bidding war by all of the Democratic presidential campaigns as to which one would do the most to deal with the climate crisis. And in 2026, you're going to see that wave again. Every headline is just another spur to young people to get back in this game, to get motivated. They're not going to agonize. They're going to organize. That's what's coming towards the 2026 elections. And all of these Republicans that think that they can vote to slash all these clean energy programs with impunity, they should reconsider, because otherwise they're going to be looking for a new job after the next election. The young people made the big difference in the 2018 and the 2020 election, and they're going to do so again in 2026. Young people are leading us on these issues. They want to have the capacity to have a new energy economy, new technologies, in the same way that everyone is walking around with these new digital technologies, a computer that's more powerful than one that was on the Apollo mission. They want the same thing for energy. This took 10 years. That's all and they know that's all we need for a clean energy revolution, 10 years, and they know that they're battling against the oil, gas, and coal industry who want to continue to pollute, continue to have asthma as an epidemic in our country, continue to have cancer that is avoidable, that is built into the lives of young people and old all across our country and all across the planet. We have to be the global leader. We can't be the laggard. We must be the leader globally. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't tell the rest of the world that they should do something and you yourself are not doing it. You can't tell someone not to smoke or drink and have a cigar in your hand and a beer on a bar stool somewhere. You have to be the leader. Young people want that role for us. That's what makes me optimistic, and I think in 2026, the Republicans who decide to side with the Muskocracy are going to pay a big political price.
All right. Well, on that note, Senator Markey, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate it very much.
What I'm seeing in terms of AI compute is I've never seen any technology advance faster than this. The artificial intelligence compute coming online appears to be increasing by a factor of 10 every 6 months. Like, obviously that cannot continue at such a high rate for forever, or it will exceed the mass of the universe, but I've never seen anything like it. And this is why you see NVIDIA's market cap being so gigantic, because they currently have the best neural net chips. I mean, I think didn't NVIDIA's market cap exceed the GDP of Canada or something recently? Anyway, it was quite high. So, yeah, it may go higher, who knows? The chip rush is bigger than any gold rush. We really are on the edge of probably the biggest technology revolution that has ever existed. There's supposedly a sort of a Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, we live in the most interesting of times, the most interesting.
Well, from Senator Markey's lips to your ears, you heard from the man himself, Elon Musk. So now let's please welcome to the stage our first panel in conversation with my colleague, Rachel Frazen. She's joined by Alice Hill. How do you do, sir? A senior fellow of the Energy and Environment Council on the Council of Foreign Relations. Hi. Leslie Jantarasamy, Vice President of Research and Industry Strategy at Smart Electric Power Alliance, and Sean Gallagher, he is the SVP of Policy at Solar Energy Industries Association. Welcome to all of you. Rachel, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Everybody, thank you for being here with us. First of all, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and how the Trump administration is impacting your work? Sean, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. And first of all, thanks so much for having me here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Sean Gallagher. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy at SEIA. SEIA is the National Trade Association for the Solar and Storage Industries. We represent about 1,200 member companies across the spectrum of the solar and storage industries, everything from rooftop installers to manufacturers to developers and bankers and construction companies. So you name it, if there's a company that's or their sector in the solar system or the storage storage industry, they're a member of SEIA, or we represent them. I oversee our policy and advocacy work nationally and at the state level, so I oversee our congressional, our federal administrative, and our state policy teams. In response to your question, I guess these days all eyes are on the reconciliation package. We've already heard some discussion of that this morning, and we've spent a lot of time, frankly, over the last 2 years, working to shore up support from congressional Republicans for the clean energy tax credits that are in the IRA. As we've already heard this morning, many of the benefits, over 80% of the investments from the IRA, have gone into Republican-led districts. We've been spending a lot of time on the Hill over the last a few months, as you might imagine, trying to educate lawmakers about those benefits, bring home to them the need for clean energy to meet rising energy demand. We just saw the video. AI and data center growth is leading to demand growth like we haven't seen in over 20 years. And clean energy and solar and storage in particular, are going to be critical parts of meeting the administration's goals for American energy dominance, and in particular, meeting that demand growth.
And hey everyone, I'm Leslie Jantarasamy with the Smart Electric Power Alliance, or SEPA, and so we are a national nonprofit that is accelerating the transition to clean, reliable, affordable, and resilient energy for all. And we work a lot with members across the United States, but also companies with global footprints, thinking about how do we deploy technologies, how do we think about those on-the-ground solutions to make sure that the electric power system is modernized and ready for the next generation of technologies. And so, our sweet spot really is at that intersection of technology, policy, and programs. And so in response to your question about how things have changed for the industry, I think on the technology front, things are pretty exciting. This is a really cool time to be working in energy and energy policy at this moment, just because things are moving in terms of both on the supply side. We're seeing really interesting deals being struck related to the data center and demand growth. How do we meet this new challenge related to the technologies for geothermal, for example, for advanced nuclear? People are thinking creatively about how do we do this with new technologies, but also closer to the distribution side where the energy actually reaches people's houses. We are seeing really exciting advances in technologies related to how do you aggregate all of these distributed energy resources, so like rooftop solar, batteries, that are on people's houses or businesses, and how do we use technology to look across those systems and be able to have that visibility into those, the ability of those disaggregated resources to provide services back to the grid. So on the technology front, I think things are great. On this policy and program side, that's where we see changes happening, where there's just uncertainty related to things that we've already heard our other speakers today at the summit mention, related to the budget reconciliation approach, related to grant programs that have been previously authorized under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the IRA. And so those are the sort of question marks. Are those happening? Are they not happening? How do our members who are looking at the ability to finance new projects, to expand, and invest in the grid and in new energy technologies? How do they ensure that they're making smart investments with customers in mind? So being able to ensure that costs are, remain affordable and reasonable, and that customers are being protected as we think about, how the policy environment is changing.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alice Hill. I'm the David M. Rubenstein Senior Fellow for the Energy and Environment at the Council on Foreign Relations. Before that, I served as the Senior Director for Resilience on the National Security Council staff under President Obama, as well as Special Assistant to President Obama, where I looked at issues relating to the grid, climate change resilience, and also energy challenges that we had, and cooperation with, for example, Canada, with ensuring that we had a free flow of energy to the United States. Since this election, my job has changed. My job is to attempt to positively influence policy and understand what's happening on the global stage as that impacts the U.S. So with the president's agenda, and I do support action on climate change, given we know the risks that are already unfolding here in the United States, it's a little limited as to what influence we are finding at the federal level. There are some bipartisan areas, nuclear is one, that we see both sides of the aisle interested in. And so the question there is, how do we do that safely, quickly, and cheaply? And then I also follow the other domestic challenges here. Really interesting to me is the number of groups who are trying to step into the void that has been created. And most visibly, that is with regard to science. The cuts to NOAA, NASA, with regard to climate science, and in particular, the suggestion that there will be no national climate assessment, a congressionally mandated report that is critical for states, subnational governments, to states, municipalities, territories, tribes, to understand their risks. There's a suggestion that perhaps President Trump will not create that, or will certainly be highly curtailed. He has let go the 400 volunteer scientists. So there is this wellspring of interest from independents saying, okay, let's see if we can corral those scientists and produce this report. And I'm seeing that in other areas as well. And then the final area of interest is, what is the reaction of the rest of the world to the change in policy, particularly on climate, by the United States? Obviously, the withdrawal from the U.S. Withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord, also whether China will step into the vacuum. There are some indications that China will step up to be a leader in the global negotiations, and are really our allies understanding what's the role of the United States now in climate action, and as well as what are these choices for energy dominance mean for their economies. Lots to watch for, really rapidly changing landscape, and so that's how my work has altered rather dramatically just in the space of 100 days.
Well, Alice, I want to ask you about what you just said about the National Climate Assessment. As we know, those scientists were dismissed. So is that the end of, I guess, climate science in the U.S. or, this climate report? Or do you think that scientists will band together and figure out a way to get this information out?
Well, I am hopeful, and I was contacted yesterday by a group that has been working on that delta between climate science and really science that can be applied on the ground. And this group had been long-lasting, and they are thinking about taking up this challenge. Stepping back, the cuts to science, I believe, are among the most serious things that have occurred. If you look at the last 80 years of our nation, it's been built on innovation. And how has that innovation occurred? Because the federal government has made substantial investments in science, in research and development. And how have they done that? They've done that through the universities. The universities have done this basic research science, and then it's spun off to help Mr. Musk create Tesla, to help all sorts of innovation. And that has also been a magnet for the world's brightest brains. We have really seen our immigration of engineers, scientists, has propelled our economy to make us the richest nation in the world. We're seeing a dramatic cutback in immigration of those scientists. We're seeing Canada, Australia, France, the EU recruiting our scientists, whether they're here on a green card or whether they're homegrown, recruiting them to move to do the science elsewhere. And that, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many economists, will cost us greatly in terms of our long-term economic stability and long-term economic picture.
Sean, I wanted to go to you, and I wanted to ask you about the IRA tax credits. Are the solar credits on the chopping block? And if so, what does that mean for your industry?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one we've been preparing for really ever since the IRA was enacted 2 years ago, right? You saw once the Republicans took control of the House in 23, there were several attempts to repeal the IRA outright, and so we've been talking to folks on the Republican side of the aisle, really since days after the IRA was enacted to help shore up that support, demonstrate to them the benefits that the IRA brings to their districts. And I think what we can do is sort of do the work to bring it home to them. I think one thing that's changed and one thing that's really relevant to the conversation today is this growth in energy demand, right? I was down at a couple of weeks ago in Houston at CERAWeek, the biggest oil and gas conference in the country. All of the discussion was about data center and AI-led electricity growth and how that growth was going to get met. Well, the fact of the matter is 85% of all the new electricity generation resources that were brought online last year were solar and battery storage. 75% of the most advanced projects in the interconnection queues to come online over the next several years are solar and battery storage projects. Gas turbines aren't available, right? Everyone would like to do more gas. If you don't have a gas turbine on order, you can't get it for 3, 4, 5 years, right? And you don't have to listen to me to say that. You can listen to John Ketchum, the CEO of NextEra, right? They're the biggest natural gas power plant builder in the world. So what are we going to do to meet the growing demand? What are we going to do to meet the president's goals of achieving energy dominance? How are we going to sustain the renaissance in U.S. manufacturing that has occurred over the 2+ years? In the last 2 years, our module manufacturing capabilities in the U.S. has grown from 7 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts. So we are bringing back solar manufacturing and battery storage manufacturing from China. And as the module manufacturing has grown, so now is the rest of the supply chain. So cell manufacturing is starting to grow. Wafer manufacturing is starting to grow. All the other associated components of the manufacturing environment are starting to grow. There are module manufacturing plants in Georgia. There are power electronic manufacturing facilities in Texas and South Carolina. There is steel that's going into solar in West Virginia. There are tracking. These are the steel that rotates the panels in Texas and elsewhere. And you'll probably notice that the states that I mentioned are mostly Republican-led states. So a very large proportion of the manufacturing investments that have gone into the country in the last 2 years have gone into Republican-led states and districts. They're creating, we've seen an increase of about 29,000 manufacturing jobs. We see that manufacturing growing to something like 100,000 over the next several years. If we want to sustain that manufacturing, if we want to win the race for AI, if we want to beat China, we need the power, and the way to bring that power online and the way to bring enough power online to meet that growing demand is to rely on solar and storage, particularly in the near term. We used to joke that natural gas was a bridge to renewables. Now the line is renewables are a bridge to natural gas. So my view is that the road to energy dominance runs through solar and storage. Yes, we completely agree with the congressman that we need an all-the-above energy strategy in this country, but a big part of that's going to be solar and storage. And if we're going to meet the energy demand, we need to do it tomorrow because that's what's available.
And when you make that case to Republicans, one, are they receptive? And two, do you think that they are willing to fight, maybe even against their own party, to preserve these credits?
You know, a growing number of House Republicans has indicated that they're interested in maintaining these credits. You saw Mr. Garbarino led a letter last summer, had, I believe, 14 signers on it, 18 signers. Letter this spring had 21 signers on it. We saw a similar letter from Senator Curtis in the Senate. And so I think these messages and this need is really starting to come home for many members of Congress. And I think one of the things that's, I think really folks is resonating with people is the speed to power. Solar and storage can be brought online more quickly than any other resource. And data centers, they need power today. They don't want to wait 3-4 years for power. So if you're going to meet that demand, you need to use what we have today while you develop the things that we're going to have tomorrow.
Leslie, I want to go to you. Tell us what you're hearing from your members. You know, are the investment decisions that they're making based on the policies that we're seeing here in Washington? And if so, which ones? And does uncertainty over things like tax credits, make folks more hesitant to invest in renewables?
Sure. Well, I think that kind of big picture here, we're on a very large ship in terms of the decisions and technologies that utilities and our members and others are thinking about deploying on their systems, right? So it's very hard to just quickly pivot, right? So there are decisions that have been sort of already in the pipeline that are going to be deployed on the system. So we're seeing, lots of investments continue in renewables and in batteries and in, the deployment of electric vehicles and other things that affect how, distribution and how energy gets to the consumer. And so those things, maybe invite me back in a year and, we'll talk about maybe some of those differences and how that has played out. But I do think that it is an environment of uncertainty. And so that does make people kind of step back and say okay, well, how quickly am I going to deploy? There are certain, projects that they had, an interest in pursuing, but maybe that's not a 2025 play. Maybe that's, a few years from now. And so I think we'll start to see, how that data, shows up in the next couple of years in terms of how, but at the same time, we're seeing pressures, from this increased demand growth that say there's no time to waste. We need every single electron possible on the system now. And so that's where we start to get squeezed and start to, our members are saying, how do we balance all of those things? State regulatory, agencies and bodies are thinking about how do we create frameworks and, approval processes for projects in a way that, again, protects customers, makes sure that the rates, are not seeing shocks from the kind of simultaneous squeeze of the need to, accelerate investments in the system, make the system bigger, expand it, modernize it. And also kind of pulling back to Alice's point about the science and the climate. And this is where I really think, where the environment meets the energy conversation here is around understanding the changing environment and the, increasing frequency of extreme weather events, wildfires, other things that put pressure on electric power and other energy infrastructure. Those things are real, and our members, utilities, and state PUCs and others are really grappling with how do you respond to changing threats and risk profiles in your system, as well as how do we then expand and make sure that we have the energy ready to go when it's needed.
And what do you see as, I guess, the biggest hurdles in getting more projects online? Is it interconnection queues? Is it permitting? Is it tax credits and, securing financing? And what can be done, if anything, about those problems?
Rachel, just like energy technologies, it's all of the above, right? All of those things are really important. And, there are some geographical differences, certain areas of the country may be, more congested in terms of the project buildup than others. But I do think that all of those play a really important role.
Alice, going in a little bit of a different direction, I believe some of your background is in resilience and natural disasters. Can you talk to us, what do you make of this administration's efforts to maybe even eliminate FEMA, and what impact are things like that going to have on the American people?
Well, there is discussion of shifting the paradigm. So the current paradigm has been that the federal government essentially comes in after a disaster and gives a lot of assistance. It's public assistance. It's assistance to the community to rebuild a hospital. There's not that much to individual households, something like $2,000. But over time, that's really since Dwight Eisenhower, we've shifted the paradigm away from the localities. Used to be philanthropy, or your local government would help you out after a disaster. And then actually with President Hoover and then President Eisenhower, we've just grown, and now it's pretty much the federal government is the cavalry that rides to the rescue. That has created a moral hazard. The states aren't as prepared. North Carolina just came out with a report analyzing the response during Milton. It didn't criticize FEMA. It criticized its own emergency management. And that's a pretty common story, not maybe in California or New York. Emergency management is underfunded by the states. So President Obama was interested in doing the same thing, shifting that paradigm. Let's have the states and local communities step up, be more response ready. The challenge is the suddenness with which this is happening. The states aren't ready. They don't have emergency managers on call. They don't have the kind of interconnectivity that's required to really respond. There can't pre-positioned supplies as FEMA has all over the country, so it can be there in 3 days. So as this shift occurs, unfortunately, I think there will be serious damage. There will be lives lost because there'll be a deficit on the state side, and then the Trump administration appears to be saying, no, we're not going to help out. So it's a philosophical debate. I see both sides. I very much worry about the speed with which this decision has been made, because the state and local governments are not ready, and they're making that very clear already. They are speaking up and saying, we are not ready for this. We just haven't planned for it yet.
Mm-hmm. And can you elaborate on that? Like, what can FEMA do that the states don't have, and could those resources be redistributed in a way that does give the states the ability to take that on?
Well, FEMA, right out here in Emmitsburg, has a huge training facility. So it brings in wildfire traders. It brings in emergency managers. It holds conferences across the United States to help communities understand what the communication systems are, what the best practices are for responding to various events, including wildfires. These wildfires are unlike any wildfires we've fought in the past. The wildfires in the past were out in wildlands. Now we're fighting very rapidly moving fires in the wildland-urban interface, where you have a subdivision right up next to the hills, and subdivisions wiped out. Those are different kinds of firefighting capabilities, so FEMA has been involved with that, just training people and understanding how to respond properly. FEMA also has a great deal of money that it has been giving to the states to help them to prepare in advance, have better building codes. A stronger building code, for every dollar you spend, say, elevating a house to avoid flood coming underneath, you save $11 in damages. U.S. Chamber of Commerce calculates it's $13 in damage saved for every dollar spent if you reduce risk. FEMA has huge programs focused on reducing risk. That money will no longer be available, so the states may not make those kinds of investments, which means that the damage will be greater as these events become more extreme. We also have decisions being made. FEMA helps with flood maps to tell communities, maybe you don't want to be in a flood zone when you put that hospital. That might not be such a good idea. That information may not be readily available, so poor choices, land use choices, could be made as a result of FEMA pulling back and the science pulling back from NOAA in particular going forward.
And unfortunately, I think that's our time. Thank you guys for a great discussion.
Thank you.
of course, I reject the label clean tech. That's just a marketing term.
Okay.
I think what that means is lower greenhouse gas emissions, but much more material intensity, much more land
Like solar
intensity, and
panels?
intermittent solar panels.
Okay.
So, and you're right, China is huge in the manufacturing of these systems. China has built lots of wind and solar, but China last year permitted 100 gigawatts of coal power. Their energy system is more hydrocarbon dominant than ours. So they're not moving that direction. They're building a manufacturing industry to sell products to the United States and Europe. So far, I would say it's worked for them better than it's worked for us. The United States gets just over 3% of our primary energy from wind, solar, and batteries. 3%. Hundreds of billions of dollars for 3%.
Well, I've played on the stage, played off the stage. I love it. Of course, that was the Secretary of Energy. The crowd like this that person needs no introduction. So we are now joined by our final guest before the break. Welcome, Heather Reams. She is the president of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, a right of center nonprofit organization. Heather, great to see you. Good morning.
How are you? Hi. I've got my water with me here. I've been a little raspy with all the pollen these days. So,
oh, I hear you.
And
I was
forgive me.
Just talking about that this morning with my wife. Thank God for the rain to literally wash the air of all that pollen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being here. It's been really an interesting and fruitful discussion so far this morning. And so I'm eager to get some of your perspectives. We've heard a lot about the all of the above energy strategy.
Yeah.
It seems to be on the lips of everyone this morning and everybody in this sector around town over the course of the last, years. So that seems to be a bipartisan consensus that we need more energy production in this country, not less. So look no further than the energy needed to support the massive new data centers across the country, powering industries like AI, artificial intelligence, and crypto mining.
Right.
What does that look like now, moving forward?
In terms of what kind of energy we can get online? Well, you mentioned all the above, and actually I had an op-ed recently about wondering if all the above is still, the law of the land for Republicans. We have been seeing some retracting away from all the above. I know this morning we heard all the above from Congressman Weber, and I definitely appreciate hearing that. But there's some factions of the party who are pulling away from all the above and leaning towards a best of the above. And I want to caution that's dangerous. Republicans have traditionally been more all the above. And then Democrats usually didn't like that term. Now I was reading this morning that Representative Huffman was saying, I thought we were all the above, and he was too. So it's interesting how we're seeing things realign right now.
Okay, so best of the above, how is that defined by the Republicans?
I think in the eye of the beholder, really. Some would say it goes towards baseload power only. So the reliability that's there, and anything that has intermittency, like renewable energy, wouldn't be considered best of the above. And I think that's false. Right now, we just heard from the last panel, we know that deploying energy right now, what we need right now, is going to be a renewable energy plus battery storage. That's deployable today, and it can be done very, very quickly. We don't have to worry about supply chains to make sure that we're getting the gas turbine. I think Sean was saying the bridge between renewable energy and natural gas is very true, but I think there's a place for all kinds of energy, depending where it is. And the more energy that we make here in the United States, heck, that's more we can export around the world. So I think it's a win-win when we think about all the above.
Okay, so give me your analysis. This is something you think about and talk about a lot, obviously, of why that shift has happened within the Republican Party.
I would say it's politics over policy for sure. That this White House has not been kind to a lot of renewable energy. It's different from the last administration. I felt like it was kind of all the above, kind of left it there. This Trump 2.0 seems to be a little bit more hostile to all the above and is leaning towards a best of the above. And I think some members in Congress are taking that lead. And if they disagree with the president, they're doing so privately and not necessarily publicly. You praise publicly and you criticize privately. I do the same. But I think there's some politics going on here.
Well, politics is always a reflection of the voters' mood, right?
Yeah, maybe so, but also who's the dominant voice in Washington right now? A new president is coming in, And, the pendulum tends to swing in the balance of power towards the White House every time there's a new president. So we've just finished 100 days. I expect this to level out. But right now, I'm making sure I'm cautioning against that best of the above, because we do need, as people say, every electron we can possibly get, but also just thinking longer term, the ability to produce homegrown energy here in the United States means more we can export to our allies around the world.
Okay, I'm going to get off script here because
Yeah.
I have this weird fixation with this issue that you just raised and was raised at the earlier panel on battery storage. For years, it was always, well, we can't take the next step because the battery storage challenges and sort of limit us in terms of EVs and everything else that, all these other applications. So what is the breakthrough? What's the state of play?
And batteries?
Yeah.
I mean, it's long duration battery storage is getting better and better. And there's different kinds of technologies that are happening with different kinds of components, whether they're domestically sourced or they have some foreign sourcing involved. It is exciting. In fact, some of the moonshot type of prize programs were done in Trump 1 for battery storage. So, I mean, don't people say, oh, but Trump didn't do anything for renewable energy. That's not true. You have to look at the track record, what's going on. So I think, battery storage absolutely has a place, and certainly co-location when you're putting a data center near the site of producing the energy, combining with batteries. Wow, you've got something pretty powerful there, and companies themselves are willing to pay for it. So that's a win as well.
One of the things that was always a dividing line between red and blue in this town was permitting reform, right? And so we're hearing a lot about it these days, and we've talked about some of the EOs that have been signed and some of the initiatives in Congress. Where is their middle ground? Where is the balance? How should it be streamlined and modernized?
Well, I'll say another thing. Permitting is also in the eye of the beholder, depending on who you're talking to. We came so close in the last Congress of getting a bill that was bipartisan, falling apart at the last minute. I know was hard for Senators Manchin and Barrasso to see that. And I know Chairman Westerman and his team worked really hard to try to get that over the line. That bill exists, by the way. It still is sitting in the wings, waiting to be reinvigorated, maybe updated a little bit. And that's what we're hopeful for, to see that, because that's a great starting place where the bipartisanship was to begin with. I think everyone agrees that the government process is too slow. I think how slow, what needs to be streamlined. And if you talk to the environmental community, they're going to say something different than businesses. We know that the legal process and the judicial review needs to be streamlined. It's just taking too darn long. And when our competitors, international competitors, are beating us, and I mean by leaps and bounds of being able to deploy energy faster than we can, we've got to look at things and say, what can we do differently? And I've also heard a lot from AI, the benefits that AI can bring into modernizing how we're thinking about permitting as well. I think that's an exciting discussion we've been having since President Trump has taken office and Elon Musk has been in and around Washington, and talking about how we can use AI to help modernize the process. So I think we start with the bill we didn't quite get across the finish line last year, and go from there.
So reducing regulations, permitting reform, it's more than just an ideological issue.
I think it's a red, white, and blue issue for sure.
Okay. You talk to Republicans a lot about the climate and what should be done about it. With the Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, where are we on climate and climate policy?
Yeah, well, I'll caution that, remember that while there is that so-called trifecta, these margins are razor thin, particularly in the House of Representatives. So there's a majority, but barely a majority. So, and not all Republicans agree about what to do about climate in the House or the Senate, or even the White House for that matter. Republicans are fairly new to engaging on using the word climate, much less legislating on it. I think Republicans, though, have been always talking about conservation, preservation of the environment, and they're going to go at it, fixing a problem differently than Democrats will be. And that's one of the key things that Crest has been trying to do with my organization, is really trying to educate that Republicans are going to engage on reducing emissions differently. So an example of that, if you're displacing coal with natural gas, you're going to reduce emissions. We did so here in the United States, nearly by 40%. Other developing nations want electricity. They deserve electricity. We know that electricity is the backbone of a modern economy. Let's make sure that there's better outcomes for communities, for families, for health, for education, all of that. So displacing coal with natural gas is a step in the right direction. It gives strong baseload power. We're providing the LNG. All boats kind of rise. But there are some that say, no, keep it in the ground. LNG should not be used, and we need to move them only to renewable energy. And I disagree with that. Republicans disagree with that. We need to be using the sources that are available to modernize and lower global emissions. And displacing coal will do that.
The president talks about beautiful, clean coal, though.
He does.
Yeah.
He does. He's actually one of the few Republicans recently that I've heard talk about coal. Certainly some of the delegations that are coal country, West Virginia, Wyoming, of course, but it's been less and less. And I think it's just because the numbers aren't there, the popularity isn't there, and there are other technologies that can replace it. So coal wants to compete, let it compete. But at the end of the day, I think the voters really want cleaner sources, and they exist. Why not use them?
Okay. So I'm going to give you a chance to talk about some of the projects and technologies your company has developed and implemented.
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit organization that engages Republicans about the benefits of clean energy, clean tech, and climate. And you can say you can use the C word without checking your Republican bona fides. You can be a Republican.
That being climate.
Yeah, I mean, the C word is climate, by the way.
Okay.
No, a lot of people. Some people, I wonder what they think when I say the C word. So a lot of things we do are educational based, giving Republicans an opportunity to talk about what they're for. So tomorrow, for instance, we have a leaders event, energy event, Republicans are coming from the Hill, mostly House, but some Senate, talking about why they support some of the provisions in the IRA tax credits. While they didn't vote for it because of the partisan process, they have been supportive of those tax incentives because they're benefiting their district. Someone like Representative Buddy Carter, someone like Representative Miller Meeks, Representative Garbarino. These are members who have also signed a letter talking about, hey, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of this has benefited our district. We want to talk about that. And remember, in the IRA, those tax credits, a lot of those tax credits had genealogy that was Republican. It's just the process was super partisan. Reconciliation, of course, we're going through a reconciliation process right now. It's also partisan. Both sides use it. It's just not great for bipartisanship.
Okay, short term, you talked about reconciliation. As a daily news reporter and a breaking news reporter, I am very much focused on how that's all going to shape out. And I know it's not going to happen tomorrow or next week, but it's certainly over the next several weeks and a couple months. What is going to be the impact on the issues that you care about in the short term?
Well, I mean, certainly what we're going through right now with House Ways and Means is looking at the fate of these tax credits. There's in the Republican Party a balance of the fiscal responsibility, size of government, what is the appropriate role of government, and then how these tax benefits can benefit the United States, the taxpayer. And that's in the eye of the beholder, right? And this compromise is messy. It's sausage making. Mm-hmm. You got to have a stomach for this stuff.
Right.
And that's where we believe that a lot of these tax credits are going to help the United States. There's also business certainty. Are we a country that when we say we permit something, it happens? When we give it a tax credit, it continues? And companies have put billions of dollars in investment out there to pull the carpet out from underneath them.
And then a political wind shift.
And then boom. I mean, and this pendulum swinging is really not good for certainty, not good for business. We know that, but I think a lot of businesses themselves have been going up to Capitol Hill to explain that themselves. So maybe there's some trimming. Maybe there's caps on some of the tax credits. Maybe the duration isn't as long. But we'd like to see all of them stay for some duration. And then, there'll be another political climate 4 years from now or whenever that is. They'll live to see another day. But right now, we'd like to see some of them stay for certainty.
Okay, that was the short term.
Yep.
In the long term, how do you see the energy efficiency industry evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Energy efficiency specifically, or just energy?
Yeah.
No, energy efficiency has a huge role right now. The technologies now, we can use technology and energy efficiency to reduce the energy that we use, and we can use that for other things. I mean, the scarcity of electricity right now is huge. So anything we can do to make it more efficient right now and in the future is incredibly important. I mean, the demand we know is huge. AI is going to use a lot. Electrification is going to use a lot. I mean, we need to be thinking about today and tomorrow. And we hope our legislators and our policymakers are thinking about that and legislating accordingly.
So how should the government empower private companies to develop and enhance American technologies that capture carbon, for example, while maintaining jobs is what, obviously what members of Congress care about, their districts in some of these communities?
As a right of center organization, we want to see less on the mandate side and more on the incentive side. So more carrot, less stick. So in the previous administration, the Biden administration, we saw a lot of mandates, and you're seeing those being repealed by Republicans because we just don't like mandates. We don't like the government saying do this and do that. We like more incentivizing and then saying let the market kind of take over from there. And there is some tinkering with the market when you make incentives. I understand that. But saying like this is the kind of technology, this is the kind of electric vehicle you must use. This is the kind of electricity you need to use. You can't use coal. You can't use natural gas. These types of things have really created this. That was a pendulum swing, by the way. Now we're having a pendulum swing the other way. So what we'd like to see is something more down the middle.
Right. You've talked about more carrot, less stick.
Yeah.
And you've written that strict federal regulations are not the way to go for clean energy.
Exactly.
And climate innovation. So what is the better path?
Well, I mean, what we've seen traditionally from Democrats have been, well, it's 1.5 degrees, and we have to do whatever we can do to keep below 1.5 degrees Celsius because we're all going to burn. And I think there's that kind of rhetoric. While I agree that the climate is changing, while I agree we have to reduce emissions, I'm hoping we're not going to burn, first of all, our poor kids. But, and then the timelines. But we need to be more realistic about what can we pass right now? And if we're talking about keeping it in the ground, or we can't use renewable energy, whoever it is, it's just not realistic. All of the above is a great way to go. The technology is here. People are making money on it. Our lives are improving. I say it's simple, but maybe it's not easy, right?
So what is the main point that you want left-leaning clean energy advocates and policymakers to understand? What's the point you want to get across?
Compromise. For years, Democrats have been saying in the environmental community, please come to the table. Republicans, please come to the table and recognize that the climate is changing, that we have to do something on a bipartisan basis. Republicans are there. They're talking. And I can count on fingers and toes how many Republicans want to make a deal right now on energy, on climate. They recognize that there's an intersection. I would say take them up on it. Work with them. Don't move the goalpost further away. Come back to the center.
All right, let's drill down, no pun intended, on some specifics. The top 2 or 3 necessary policy reforms to help accelerate some of the reforms you're talking about.
So in permitting, I think permitting was a huge missed opportunity. And the IRA, whether you like it or not, is incentivizing energy. If you combine that with permitting reform, being able to deploy that energy, steel in the ground quicker, we would see more results. That was the intention of Senator Manchin when he signed that the IRA. So I think permitting reform holds the key to a lot of what we're talking about because we're going to be able to build. We're able to streamline. We're going to be able to build without the lawsuits. I think that's a huge part of it. I think second is certainty, business certainty. We've got to have certainty. This pendulum is killing us. I know personally, I'm not buying certain things because the economy is kind of crazy right now.
I don't think you're the only one.
No, I mean, I know. If I even think about me, but think about you, think about businesses. Are you going to put out $5 billion right now in something? That's a huge risk right now. So we're kind of all recoiling, and we need incentives to say, and we need certainty to say, spend, build, make it better, make our lives better. And I think, like I said, it sounds simple, but it doesn't seem to be easy these days.
Heather, I'm getting a wrap, so final thoughts?
Well, I guess I'll make a plug for the benefits of clean energy, the clean energy tax credits. There are a lot of Republicans that support it. And as soon as we deal with this in reconciliation, my friends, permitting reform. Let's go get it.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Heather. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break. For those in the room, stretch your legs. Maybe talk to the person next to you. Grab a coffee or tea just outside. Make sure you join us in a few minutes when we'll hear from former Governor and EPA Administrator Christine Todd Whitman, and we're all looking forward to that. For those on the live stream, stick with us. White House reporter Alex Gangitano, my colleague from 400 North Capitol Street, and Energy and Environment reporter Rachel Frazin. We heard from her earlier. They're going to break down what we've heard so far this morning and what they are looking forward to hearing during the rest of our discussion in the program. So for all, please check with us on our social channels. Let us know what you're thinking and use the hashtag Hill-Energy, the-Hill-Energy. All right, I got that right. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our energy and environment panels this morning. I'm here with Rachel Frazin to break down some of the start of what we've heard today. I'm the White House reporter, Alex Gangitano, and of course, Rachel covers energy and environment here at The Hill. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the panel that you moderated. The discussion was about the future of climate science and how there've been a lot of cuts with this new administration. Well, we're 100 days in, I guess not new anymore, to funding for science and how that impacts innovation. And I thought Alice Hill was really interested when she talked about how innovation has propelled our economy. We've been able to bring immigrants in who want to work on science here in the U.S., but those folks might be recruited elsewhere, and we miss out on a lot of these good scientists. So can you talk a little bit about what your coverage has been like with that and what you might have learned from some of these panelists?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack and to go over. So there have been a lot of cuts to science. One of the things that's been in the news recently is they dismissed all of the volunteer scientists who are working on the National Climate Assessment, which is a congressionally mandated assessment. It comes out every couple of years, and it talks not only about the state of climate science generally, but about how climate change is going to impact the United States specifically. Like, unlike a lot of climate reports, for example, it's done in Fahrenheit as opposed to Celsius, which for me is a nice change because I actually understand those temperature changes as an American.
Impressive.
So it's not clear what's going to happen with that report because it is mandated by Congress, but they've just let all of these volunteer scientists go. We're also seeing cuts at the agencies, as you and I'm sure the viewers know. DOGE is making cuts across the board to federal workers. I know that the Commerce Department, which houses NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which runs a lot of this nation's climate science, a lot of those probationary workers have been sort of refired, so they let them go again once there were developments in the court. And a lot of those folks are folks who work on science, not just climate science, although that's a part of it, but ocean science and weather prediction. And so all of those things are being impacted. We're seeing, some weather balloons launches being suspended because of staffing shortages. And so there's definitely a lot there to unpack. They have said in sort of a leaked budget document and possibly also the skinny budget that they want to eliminate NOAA's office of that does a lot of this science.
Wow. Yeah, on those weather impacts, and obviously it seems like there's extreme weather events, several times throughout the year in the States. And some of what Leslie was talking about is how much those events put pressure on our electric power and how there's been some shifts in navigating how to respond to those threats because they are more frequent. But there's also the fact that we don't have the same staffing levels and maybe research that we used to have in place to figure out how to respond to extreme weather.
Right, and cutting climate science does not cut climate disasters. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. That's right. So we will still have these extreme weather events that might be linked to the heating of our planet. And it'll be interesting to see, whether or not, as we have these events going forward, whether that changes the political pressure and whether it changes sort of how we respond.
Yeah. Another topic that I find really interesting is FEMA and the future of FEMA. You talked about this on your panel, and of course, the Trump administration, the president in particular, has said that FEMA should be moved back to the states. We saw that right away. In January, he went to California in the wake of the wildfires, and this was days into his administration after the inauguration, and he said, I think FEMA should not be a federal administration anymore and should move to the states. What was interesting about your panel is you were discussing how yes, that makes sense. Some of your panelists were saying actually it should move to the states. The states should have more response resources, but making it so immediate is what the issue is. Can you tell us a little bit about that discussion?
Yeah, and in a lot of my reporting, I've actually heard a lot of alarm about this call to break up FEMA and break it up so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, we rely on the federal government for is sort of a broad scale coordination, sort of a view from the top of like, how do we coordinate this? People who have experience doing this, because those FEMA people do this all the time, whereas if you're in a state, you may only get a disaster once in a while, so you're more prepared. So I've actually heard some bipartisan alarm from these calls, but I've also heard bipartisan support for maybe a shift, maybe, changing some of the responsibilities, but I think a lot of the concern I'm hearing was the outright call to eliminate FEMA as opposed to, calls to maybe shift some of the responsibilities around. So we'll have to see what they ultimately do.
Yeah, making it so immediate, because it did sound like these experts were saying these states just don't have the ability to, if it's all on them, handle it all on their own. And I don't know if that's staffing, funding, all of the above, but they do, since they've been so reliant on the federal government for so long for this, it would take a matter of time, years, I guess, maybe even decades, to actually make that so that states have what they need.
Yeah, and different states have different levels of resources. I think one of the things that Alice said that struck me was that, New York and California might actually be okay because, those are large states with a lot of people with a lot of resources. But some of the smaller states, be they Democrat or Republican, may struggle more if and when they're hit with a disaster because they just don't have the funding.
Yeah, really a bipartisan issue. We just have a couple minutes left, so I want to ask you, you're the expert on what's going on with reconciliation. Everybody's curious about your reporting on that and the fate of some of these tax credits. In Vic's last panel, they were talking about what it could mean for the IRA, which was passed under the Biden administration. No Republicans voted for that bill, but a lot of them have enjoyed the benefits of it, even touted the benefits of it on their social media accounts and whatnot. What do you think is the future of some of these tax credits? And Republicans want to eliminate, these mandates. So how will that turn out?
And that is the $1 million or multi-billion-dollar question, right? Is what happens to these tax credits? And I think it's really, really unclear because you do have a coalition of Republicans who are saying, hey, we want to look at this strategically, but you've got another coalition of Republicans who say, hey, that's not consistent. We are a free market party. Let's cut it all. And so, first of all, it's too soon to say who will win there. But even beyond that, if you look at the Republicans who do want to preserve some of the tax credits, they all have different favorites because of what projects are in their district, right? You might have somebody who's got a solar project in their district. Someone else may have like an EV manufacturing facility. Somebody else may have a hydrogen project. You got a lot of enthusiasm from folks in Iowa about biofuels, and the Midwest more broadly has a lot of corn and a lot of those projects. And so if you want to save some of them, how do you pick and choose when everybody's got sort of a different item in their district? I think one of the ones that I have heard about is, being particularly vulnerable is the electric vehicle tax credit for consumers. I think that is one that Republicans across the board have wanted to get rid of, and something I hope to talk about in the transportation panel later today. Hope to get their take on that. And so, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen.
That's been such an interesting topic, the EV mandate, or not a mandate, the EV incentivizing of tax credits is, of course, Elon Musk is very involved with this White House. This affects his company. This affects a lot of people in the States. But it's kind of been this idea that's been really politicized of, is there a mandate? Do we all have to switch to our cars? And what kind of cars we drive? So the future of that, I think Republicans are really interested in focusing on that, as you mentioned. And that could be one of like the big areas that gets cut, while other things might be able to be preserved.
And I think it's sort of there's two pieces to that, right? Because there's the incentives in Congress and there's also the regulations. And I think that Republicans have been very clear that they want to get rid of the regulations that require, EVs or require at least some percentage of new sales to be electric and move the market towards those electric vehicles. But I think that, the consumer tax credits might be more difficult, or there might be some support for that, but I also think it's among the tax credits that could get cut.
Yep. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thanks for chatting with us, and thank you for joining the two of us. Rachel has some really interesting panels coming up with some young Americans focused on climate from both sides of the aisle, and one on transportation. So thank you for tuning in.
Thanks.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Hills Energy and Environmental Summit. We're going to go straight through until lunch, which won't be long, which you will be able, and at lunch you'll be able to grab on your way out. Just a reminder, If you need to leave the room for any reason before lunch, please do so quietly between sessions so as not to disrupt the conversations on stage. Okay, speaking of on stage, next up we'll hear from two Gen Zers on the youth view of energy and the environment. But first, let's hear from another prominent Gen Z environmentalist, none other than Greta Thunberg.
The climate crisis is an existential crisis. 2024 is on track to become the hottest year ever recorded, and last year global greenhouse gas emissions reached an all-time high. In this moment that the UNFCCC is hosting yet another COP climate meeting in an authoritarian petrostate is beyond absurd. I'm not going there because of this extreme hypocrisy. These COP processes are not leading to any meaningful change. The emissions keep on increasing and we keep moving in the wrong direction, even though the science and those affected by the climate crisis have been warning us for decades about the consequences. Whatever the people in power are doing, they are doing it wrong, because this is only leading us further, deeper into deeper injustices and a climate catastrophe.
A climate catastrophe. Please welcome back to the stage Rachel Fresen. She is joined by panelist Chris Barnard. He's the president of the American Conservation Coalition. And Pavan Venkatakrishnan, an infrastructure fellow at the Institute for Progress. Welcome. Hello. Good to see you. Rachel, all yours.
Hi guys, thanks for being with us and being our representative young people. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. Do you guys think that young people do care more about this issue? And if so, how do they talk to older folks about it?
Can I start? I definitely do think young people care about climate issues. But I would say that it is not necessarily true that climate issues are more important to young voters than the cost of living or any other kitchen table issue that affects voters of every demographic. And oftentimes climate and those kitchen table issues can go hand in hand. We need a reliable grid. We need low costs. So there's definitely a great deal of intersection, but I wouldn't say that climate change is young voters' number one issue. But I imagine Chris has a better perspective.
Well, I think you're younger, so you probably have a better perspective. But I would echo what Pavan just said. The polling shows that, on average, young people do care more about this. Part of that is because when we went to school, when we talked with our peers, the things that were coming out of Hollywood, documentaries, like all those kinds of things did talk about this more. And so it's just something that we've always grown up around. But I do think that there is an important element where things are shifting. Like, it's no longer kind of 2017, 2018 era climate activism among young people. There are a lot of issues in the modern world that are also important to our generation, whether it's affording a house, the cost of living, like growing up and thinking about like things like taxes and children and all that. So I would say that part of the issue that's happened in the climate movement has been a little bit of a myopic focus on the issue and not necessarily tying it into other parts of like other issues that might matter to voters as well and to young people especially. And so basically echo what Pavan said on that.
So has climate activism shifted since like 2017, 2018? And if so, what does that shift look like? And do you think it's more effective now or less or about the same?
I think it's much less effective now. I think there's been a sense from a lot of people that climate activism has become increasingly extreme. You think of the young people blocking traffic or throwing soup at the Mona Lisa or things like that. And most normal people look at that and say, I don't want anything to do with that. I really think that a lot of the climate movement has overplayed its hand. We even go back to like some of the predictions Al Gore made that didn't come true. Obviously, these are issues that are important and that we need to address, but fear-mongering or moralizing about it has actually served the opposite purpose, I think, of pushing a lot of people away from these issues. So I think climate activism, so to speak, is, like, for the most part, a quite irrelevant force in American politics right now, at least with this administration and with where we are in the country. That doesn't mean we shouldn't care about these issues. It just means that we've gone about it the wrong way. and which is why we talk about things like reliable grids and energy abundance, balancing it with other issues. You can have both a thriving economy and tackle climate change. Like, those are all things that you need to be doing, but some of the extremism has turned a lot of people off, I'm afraid.
Well, I would just add, definitely the tenor of activism has changed a great deal. The 2018 kind of period of where, you know, the Green New Deal is a landmark of ambition on climate issues, and I think it's positive. The people who were nominally very pro-climate are now talking about manufacturing and onshoring and grid reliability. So at least in DC, I think you've seen a positive move towards more practical issues that are aligned with, you know, a national competitive vision.
And Pavan, I wanted to ask you, so what strategy or what approach do you think Democrats or people who care about climate change should be taking in this administration? Should you be looking for areas of compromise and bipartisan agreement, or should you be resisting, you know, the Trump administration's cuts to climate science and climate regulations, or should it be a mix of both? Should there be some resistance in there and also some compromise?
Well, I mean, I think it's an issue-dependent question, right? Like, if you talk about energy tax credits, that's a reconciliation process. Republicans are going to move to pass a bill. They're not going to need Democratic votes for that. But if you look at permitting reform, it is clear to me, clear to everyone probably in this room and industry, we've got to deploy projects far quicker than we are right now, and that's going to take the regular order for the most part, and Democrats will need to come to the table because it's not an oil and gas issue, it's not a renewable issue, it's a deployment issue for every technology, and I think Democrats need to be engaged.
And Chris, I wanted to ask you about the IRA tax credits. In your conversations with Republicans, what do they make of those credits? Do you think that any of them are likely to stay in place? Are we looking at a full repeal here? Are we looking at early sunsets? Like, give us a prediction. Where are we going?
Yeah, I think a lot of Republicans, especially in leadership, became skeptical of the IRA because of the partisan process through which it played out. I think that's just a reflection of the politics that we live under right now in this country. That being said, a lot of the individual bills that ended up being a part of the IRA actually had bipartisan support. We saw, as of this morning, a new bill, bipartisan bill that was introduced to even extend the 45X manufacturing tax credit. I think there are specific parts of it that do have Republican support, but they didn't really buy into the way that the package was done more broadly. My guess is that there are some tax credits that are more safe, so to speak, than other tax credits. I think you're likely to see, for example, like the EV tax credits and things like that to be cut. But things like 45Q, which is for carbon capture, 45X, 45V for hydrogen, 45U for nuclear, are much more popular with rank and file Republicans. And part of that's a reflection of the districts that they represent, right? Almost 2/3 of investments from the IRA have been flowing to Republican districts. I think it's going to be a very interesting fight in terms of how to make the dollars match up. But my guess is that there will be some version of those tax credits that stay. Just depends on how exactly those will turn out to look.
And what about renewables like solar and wind? Like, do you think those might stay or go, or is that still an open question?
I think it's an open question on what exactly happens to them. So there's like either early sunsets that might happen. There might be kind of links to how to make them be more reliable and less intermittent, whether it's like backup battery storage and things like that. I think on the whole, like most of these renewable projects are actually in Republican districts, and a lot of Republicans see the economic benefits and the jobs flowing to their districts as a result. But there are still concerns over kind of at mass subsidizing intermittent generation, and how do you balance that with the importance of a reliable grid? And so I think that that'll be something that has to kind of be played out in relationship to some of the other tax credits as well.
I wanted to ask you both about permitting reform. As you know, we have sort of been at an impasse here for months, if not years at this point. Seems like both Democrats and Republicans want a permitting reform deal, but there's a lot of disagreement on the specifics and how to do it and which, I guess, technologies get sped up. Do you believe that we will be able to move past this impasse, and what would that take?
I think so. I think the primary barrier to negotiations thus far has been that, you know, Democrats want to do transmission reform and Republicans want to do reform for oil and gas. And that is in a way linked to what happens to IRA tax credits, right? Like, as long as Republicans are still debating what those credits look like in the future, it's going to be hard to reach a bipartisan agreement. But it is true more than ever with low growth, with our national vision of competing with China. You cannot have 10-year timelines for projects, whether they're oil and gas or not. It means recognizing that all the above strategy that panelists have talked about before us. I think there will be a moment fairly soon where action is untenable, inaction is untenable. And I think you'll see a robust bipartisan negotiation, ultimately a bill.
Yeah, I would add that, in my opinion, the number one thing we can be doing right now to help build in America, to reduce emissions, and ultimately to tackle climate issues is to pass a robust, comprehensive permitting reform package. The data shows that 80 to 90% of the emissions reductions potential of the IRA will be wasted if we do not have permitting reform. And I would encourage Democrats to kind of see this as like something that's very much aligned with what they want. And I know there's concerns over like building more pipelines or locking oil and gas production. My view is that we need to disrupt the status quo, because the status quo basically benefits incumbent technologies, and permitting reform is the best way to give renewables and like manufacturing and nuclear and all those other technologies that are critically important an opportunity to actually compete. And I think we should have passed the Manchin-Barrasso bill at the end of last year. Politics got in the way, unfortunately. I doubt that we'll get a permitting bill this year, because I think reconciliation is going to drag out longer than most of us anticipate. But I am optimistic about a bill sometime this Congress, and I hope that there will be enough Democrats in the Senate that are willing to play ball.
And Pavan, obviously you support permitting reform. Should your fellow Democrats support permitting reform? You know, as you mentioned, there are a lot of hurdles, and it does take a long time to get renewable energy on the grid. But it also speeds up fossil fuels. And I know among the Democrats in particular, there's concerns about, I guess, the robustness of environmental review. And, are we giving projects, be they renewable or fossil or something else, like a good hard look and really considering the environmental impacts?
I think it's incredibly important for Democrats and Republicans to engage on a bipartisan permitting reform process. And especially for Democrats, the work of like the energy tax credit suite is not complete until regulatory pathways are clear. You can provide tax credits across the board, but if it is impossible to permit the projects those credits are tied to, they're ultimately useless. So it's incredibly important for members of both parties to recognize that and to engage, because our competitors internationally are definitely not waiting.
Yeah, I'll just add that if you actually look at the projects currently held up in permitting purgatory, the vast majority of those are renewable energy and clean energy projects. And I know, like I mentioned earlier, Democrats are worried about like the ability to permit like fossil fuel projects faster and things like that, but this would disproportionately benefit clean energy projects, because that's where a lot of the investment is, that's where a lot of the market is. But to Pavan's point, all that money is pretty much useless if you don't have the ability to actually build it. Right now we have more renewables and interconnection queues across this country than we have on the grid. The only way you solve that is by permitting, building out transmission, and doing the work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of the concerns that primarily progressive environmentalists have about permitting reform are hypothetical and ideological as opposed to practical. And if you look at the data, it's just extremely clear that permitting reform is the number one thing we can do to unlock all of this.
Chris, going in a little bit of a different direction, I want to ask you about sort of your conversations with Republicans. When you bring up climate change in front of Republicans, do they recoil? Like, how do they react? And, I know publicly many Republicans do not even acknowledge that climate change is real and man-made. How do you talk to those people about this issue?
Yeah, the first thing I would point out is that there is a caucus called the Conservative Climate Caucus. I think it's the fourth largest caucus in Congress, has 85 Republicans in it who say this is a real issue and we need to do something about it. And so I think we've seen a lot of progress in the last few years. Obviously, we're not at a moment right now politically where climate is something that a lot of people are necessarily talking about. And I think one of the problems that has happened is we've associated climate with kind of large sacrifices, or like Republicans think that it's about telling people how to live, or smuggling in other progressive policy priorities. Like we mentioned the Green New Deal, the people who wrote the Green New Deal said it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. And I think a lot of Republicans have become skeptical of what that looks like. But there's an opportunity to link climate to things like winning the clean energy arms race with China, to making it easier to build, to reindustrializing, to bringing manufacturing back to America. And you don't necessarily need to kind of hammer and moralize about the climate aspect of that while still being able to make progress on emissions reductions, on clean energy. I think there are a lot of Republicans that are open to that. We've seen some of them sign letters with regards to the tax credits and things like that. And I would say that we should use language that actually appeals to Republicans that are elected, but also Republicans back home in their districts, so that we avoid kind of this negative reaction that they associate with climate.
I would just add, IFP has the advantage of not being, number one, a partisan think tank, but not being next a climate think tank. We're an innovation policy group. So when we're talking to Republicans, we find a great deal of alignment looking at energy issues as an innovation issue, deployment issue. We're very interested in, obviously, in building nuclear, deploying geothermal. So when we're talking to Republicans, we're emphasizing, look, like with deploying nuclear, it's a cost of capital problem. If you don't have, for example, the tech neutral investment tax credit, the tech neutral production tax credit, if you don't have an LPO that is appropriately manned, we will be unable to build new nuclear in this country. There is no amount of permitting reform that is going to address that problem if you don't have capital to make these projects pencil. So we find a lot of alignment with Republicans when we're talking in those terms, and clearly identifying what are the bottlenecks to deploying the technologies which the administration wants to deploy. I think they're 100% right about energy dominance, 100% right about innovation at home, 100% right about onshoring. But the truth is that doesn't happen if administration and leaders in Congress cannot look past, maybe a partisan process that enacts tax credits or provides authority to LPO. I think there's a great opportunity to repurpose the incentives and authorities that were created by a Democratic administration and Democratic Congress for the president's objectives, and to make his electoral mandate a reality.
Just one quick additional thought, and I'm curious what you make of this. I think that part of the problem with climate politics in this country, and I think you're seeing that replicate a little bit across the world, is that climate has become a purity test for people as opposed to an actual way to get things done. What I mean by that is a lot of climate politics is focused on fairly abstract things that most people don't really understand, like whether it's parts per million or net zero or UNFCCC targets. Like, there's all these things that are like floating above, and most regular people look at that and they're like, I have no clue what it means. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's become a purity test, and we're always trying to, when I say we, I'm not, but the climate movement is always trying to like retrofit whatever is happening through this prism of like, okay, how can we do this on climate change? I think there's a lot you can do that will have climate benefits and emissions reductions benefits, but that also achieve energy dominance, that also compete with China, that reindustrialize. And I just think that it's important to not impose those purity tests and work in the art of the possible and within the Overton window that we have right now. And it's exciting that organizations like mine, which is a center-right organization, are able to work with organizations like Pavan's, which are more, I guess, center-left, the right word to use, on the actual issues that we can do right now, rather than being like the angry man, like shaking our fists at the cloud.
Mm-hmm. And do you bring these messages to this administration, and how do they react to that kind of messaging? I feel like it seems like the policy right now is everything except for wind and solar. Like, they do seem supportive of things like geothermal. They're much less supportive of wind, for example. Should people in your space be then sticking to things like geothermal as a solution, or things like nuclear, or should you be trying to push the administration to embrace, I guess, all of the above?
Yeah, I think all of the above is the right approach, especially in an era where the AI arms race with China will basically be lost or won within the next 5 years. If we have a 6 to 7 year wait time for new gas turbines, then you're going to have to fill that energy somehow. And like Heather Reams on the previous panel said, like, a lot of that can be renewables that is immediately deployable. With permitting reform, you can actually solve some of those interconnection issues. And so I think all of the above is the right approach. I think you don't want to take the California approach where you're like shutting down base load and then also over-incentivizing intermittent energy, and then you destabilize your grid. But you can take the Texas approach, right? Like, be the #1 leader in both wind and solar across the country, but also have nuclear, also have natural gas. I think that is the right approach to this. And especially if we're trying to win this AI race, we need to have any electron and any molecule that we can. and that's just critical. So I would hope that the administration can lean into that. But my point to people who are working with the administration or advocating to the administration is don't make moralistic arguments about it. Make tangible, real-life, practical arguments and say, like, look, the AI race, like competing with China, manufacturing, like these are all things that actually appeal to the administration. And I think that like the 100 days are always like a bit of a unique beast in terms of like campaign promises and kind of trying to go fast, and especially with the landslide that happened, I felt like it feels like the administration felt emboldened to just like see how much they could push. But I do think that there's a lot of people in industry and other areas that are kind of trying to reshape some of that energy to be productive. And I think that's where I think we can make some progress.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'm sure everyone on the previous panels has talked about tariffs and the trade environment. There is a proven policy playbook to accomplish the president's goals, Republicans in Congress's goals. Starts with making the most pro-growth provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent, retaining these energy tax credits, right-sizing our regulatory regime in the executive and in Congress. There's room for smart trade policy adjustments, but there's a clear playbook here, and we need to get past kind of the partisanship and embrace the tools that we have right now, and ensure that we're deploying, because no other country is waiting.
Well, thank you guys for a great discussion. I really appreciated your perspectives.
Right.
It is a high priority for me to ensure EPA never wastes any of your hard-earned tax dollars. That is my commitment to President Trump, Congress, and the American people. That's why I've pledged to cut at least 65% of the Environmental Protection Agency's total spending. Here's how we're going to do it. In 2024, EPA awarded and spent over $63 billion. In 2025, we're going to massively reduce that. To accomplish our core mission and power the great American comeback, it actually only requires less than 35% of that total. We don't want the extra money, and we don't need it. We won't be funding left-wing ideological pet projects like the past administration.
Well, that was the current administrator of the EPA. It is now our high honor and privilege to introduce a former administrator of the EPA and a former governor of New Jersey. That is none other than Christine Todd Whitman. Welcome to the stage. Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Well, thanks. It's been quite a panel, and a lot of information, a lot of thoughts, a lot of viewpoints we've heard from, but perhaps you have standing that is more relevant or at least equal to what we've heard before as a former administrator of the EPA, as someone deeply involved in these energy and environmental issues now up until today, currently, and a governor of a state where the actual work gets done. I often hear from governors of states. You've been critical of regulatory rollbacks at the EPA, and looking forward, which environmental protections do you think should be most urgently reinstated and strengthened?
Well, first let me say I think the whole day has been fascinating, a lot of good information. But in listening to the current administrator say that EPA's mission is to, how did he phrase it, bring back American economy? No, the EPA's mission is very, very clear. It's to protect human health and the environment. That's it, period, the end. And they talk about they want to continue to do that, and yet at the same time he's talking about cutting dramatically the number of scientists, the amount of money that's being spent, the kind of research that can be done. I mean, if you talk about what should you bring back, you got to start bringing back the institutional knowledge that's been lost. The number of scientists that have gone so that you can't continue to do the research that leads us to understand what is problematic in our environment. I was talking to a reporter the other day who said that, and talking to Lee Zeldin, she asked him about the progress that had been made, and his comment was, we've made great progress, the air is cleaner, the water is pure, and so we've done our job. As if the environment just stops there and nothing new happens. and we shouldn't be worried about new things. We're just now really learning the depth of the problem that we have with plastics and microplastics in the system and what it does to children and to brain development. So this administration says one thing, but it does something that negates what they're saying. They cannot continue to protect the environment and cut the staff, cut the research, roll back regulations. It doesn't work. Those two things just don't make sense together.
Well, let me ask you this. Given the rollbacks that you've talked about and the cuts you're discussing, if it were to, all this stuff were to restart tomorrow, all of the programs were reinstated, would it take time to catch up, to sort of to recover from what's happened thus far in terms of people leaving, research being abandoned, funding drying up?
Absolutely. No, you don't just flip a switch and it all comes back on. It's a little bit like the president saying we're going to drill, baby, drill. He's going to bring back mining, coal mining. Where that's closed down, that's not going to restart overnight. None of this is going to come roaring back in the next 10 days or the next 6 months or the next 10 years. It's going to take time to rebuild what's been lost. On those things, it's okay by me. But with the Environmental Protection Agency and with the science that's done, not just at EPA, but it's been cut at Health and Human Services. It's been cut at the Department of Agriculture. And the point with the federal government is that these scientists all work together and they share information. And we learn about, for instance, concentrations in the soil and what can penetrate into which products and produce. It's the kind of thing where you need to have that institutional knowledge and you need to have it where it is working together. And that's just not happening today. And you can't rebuild that overnight. A lot of the scientists that have left the agencies have gone on to other things and they're not going to come back. They've gone. They've washed their hands of it. They've been through this before with the first Trump administration, and they're not going to risk it again.
You've spoken about the importance of removing partisanship from environmental policy. What advice would you give to today's leaders to foster a more bipartisan cooperation on energy and climate issues?
Well, I think we have to rethink a little bit about how we approach the issues and talking about them. You have to make it relevant to everyday people, for them to understand why it's important. And I think, frankly, today, people are getting it more and more. I mean, it's hard to deny that nature is changing. I mean, I think, and you've heard in the earlier panel just before this, a discussion that sometimes the environmentalists are a little bit out there. And I think they made a mistake at the very beginning by being so definitive in saying humans cause climate change. We don't. The climate's been changing since the Earth was formed, and as the congressman said at the beginning, there was an ice age, and we weren't around to mess that up. But it's very clear that human activity is so exacerbating a natural phenomena that nature can no longer handle it the way she used to. And Mother Nature's mad at us right now, and she's letting us know. And it's very hard to deny that what we're seeing in storms and floods and droughts and hurricanes and sea level rise is not happening. So people are beginning to understand it, but what's hard is to get the public to understand that the cumulative impact of individual behavior, that something I do could actually make a difference, and to get them to start to take those steps that they can take without creating our economy. And we have a long history of showing that this is not a zero-sum game. It's not either a clean and green environment or a healthy, thriving economy. I mean, frankly, you can't have a healthy, thriving economy if you don't have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. That's very simple, and we've proved that over and over again. So that's the mindset that has to change, that we have to get people to look at history and say, yes, in fact, we've done this before, we can do it again, we should be doing it now, and it's important to our future to at least, we're not going to stop climate change, but we could slow it, and we need to take the time to reduce the kind of impact we're having and get prepared for how do we rebuild? I mean, what do we do? What should we do differently? It's a real problem for us from a national security point of view.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you've warned that it's a national security
It's a
threat.
national security issue.
So in your view, what should the U.S. do to take better steps to guard against that threat?
Well, I mean, that's, for instance, the Navy. The Navy has its bases because of the Navy, they're right on the coast. And every time you have sea level rise, it impacts where they're stationed, and they have to move. And that costs billions of dollars, and they have to figure out where do they go. That's where we have to look for the innovative things that we can do in rebuilding, and how do we, that's why it becomes important to us. And the other part of it is, when you have the kind of droughts that you see in places like sub-Saharan Africa, and you have nomadic tribesmen who have spent their lives moving herds along the grasses that they're able to use to feed them. They don't have that option any longer. Where do they go? They go to the cities. The cities don't have jobs for them. They don't have housing for them. That's where Al-Qaeda and Hamas go to recruit people, because they can say, we can give you a future, we can give you a job, we will house you, we will take care of you. Come with us. And it destabilizes countries that are already not very stable, which is when China and Russia move in to say, we'll help you through this crisis. And we seem to be washing our hands of any kind of international involvement at that level. So climate change is something that has a real impact on the United States, whether we acknowledge it here or other parts of the world.
You have advocated for a diverse energy mix, nuclear, solar, wind. What specific policies do you believe are most critical right now to accelerate into a clean energy transition?
Well, again, I have said, and it was interesting, I heard the congressman say it, I believe in nuclear is the only form of base power that releases no regulated pollutants or greenhouse gases while it's producing power. Now, we're not going to bring big nuclear reactors back in any time in the near future, but small modular reactors are certainly a way to go. I mean, we have to recognize we will be reliant on natural gas for a while. We have to have base power. We are a 24/7 society, and right now, solar and wind are still peak shaving. We have to do more research in how do we store that power for longer periods of time so it can become base power. There's a lot of exciting things. Again, heard from a panelist citing things on that are happening with batteries, and battery storage and reprocessing what's in those batteries, just the way there's a lot of research that's been done and exciting things done with reprocessing spent nuclear rods. It isn't all of the above except coal. We don't need that. That we can move beyond. But natural gas and oil will be a part of it. But we should be always moving forward to get beyond that, to get to the point where we can rely on the renewables. We also, though, have to understand that we're going to have to put a big investment into the infrastructure, because to bring a lot of new power on is going to stress our infrastructure, which in many places is very old. It's not sexy, but it's the kind of thing where money needs to be spent and things need to be done.
A lot of what the president has done through executive orders and done through DOGE and Elon Musk is now before the federal courts. I lost count of how many of these orders are being challenged now. So with this, and ultimately much of it is going to end up with the Supreme Court, clearly, and some of it already has. And they're considering things right now. With the Supreme Court reconsidering some of these federal agency authorities, some very fundamental constitutional questions, how concerned are you about the EPA's long-term ability to regulate emissions effectively going forward?
Well, you're right. It's up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I'm worried. I have been surprised. I didn't expect, or let me put it this way, I expected bad things from a second Trump administration. I knew they would be bad. I just didn't expect that Congress would allow the administration to take so much power away. And I have been disappointed in many of the court's decisions. But on the other hand, there have been some very good decisions, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I'm coming at it from one person's perspective. And I hold hope that they see the importance of having a regulatory agency. You know, the thing that people have to understand is Mother Nature doesn't care about geopolitical boundaries. And that is why you have to have some national standards, because what happens in one state can impact the state next to it. There were times in New Jersey when I could have closed down every manufacturing facility we had and still had trouble meeting the Clean Air Act because of transport of ash and coal from the plants in West Virginia and in Kentucky. Air transport's a real thing. We've seen that when you've had major fires, wildfires up in Canada, New York, and the East Coast were affected by that. So there are national standards that have to be out there. The states can be more protective if they want, but EPA sets the floor. They set the base, and it's needed because things transport and people are affected by what happens next to them.
Just from 30,000 feet, people who are not immersed in these issues as you are and many of the people in this room are, it's always a fundamental argument, and it has been for decades, between economic growth and environmental regulation. Is that a false choice?
Yes, absolutely. As I said earlier, and it's, I guess, in the Hill today, an op-ed that I wrote that shows the statistics.
I meant to mention that. Thank you.
Of what happens when we were at the early stages of EPA heavily regulating the new laws that were in place thanks to President Nixon. I mean, the irony here is that environment is a Republican issue. It used to be a Republican issue. I mean, the first land put aside was Abraham Lincoln when he set aside Yosemite for the public good. Teddy Roosevelt vastly increased it. Richard Nixon signing and creating EPA, signing the Clean Drinking Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Air Act. And during that time period, you saw our economic growth just take off while we were enforcing those laws. So it's not a zero-sum game. We are one of the, if not the most creative society in the world. We can meet these challenges. And if we tell people we're serious about wanting to solve these problems in a creative way, nobody will do it better than we do it. But you have to have leadership from the top that says, this is an important issue. This is something with which we have to deal. And let's unleash our abilities here.
So there's a lot of misinformation around these issues. Perhaps coming, we've heard from other panelists, and perhaps the one side overplays its hand. We've heard from others that there are misrepresentations, particularly from the current, in their view, from the current administration. So the misinformation about climate and energy policy is out there. Mm-hmm. So how can policymakers and leaders more effectively communicate the urgency of some of the challenges, the environmental challenges that you're talking about?
Tone down the rhetoric.
Tone down the rhetoric.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is today, and it's been coming for a while, and we've done it to ourselves to a certain degree. Everything is now, in Washington particularly, but it's happening in the states, unfortunately, more and more. Everything is looked at through the partisan political prism, not through the policy prism. It's not about solving problems. It's about getting another percentage on my reelect and staying in power. And when you have that as the motivator, then there's no desire to take on a controversial issue. Because the only thing you have to worry about is your primary. And now we have elected officials that are moving further and further to the right and to the left because they protect against the primary. Their districts are written in a way that ensures that they're going to be reelected. Actually, 70%, over 500,000 elective offices across the country today, and in any given election, 70% of those, there's no choice. There's only one candidate. Mm. And of those, 5 to 10% are never filled. And that's wrong. That's just wrong. Nobody is served well when you have a single-party system.
Looking back on your time leading the EPA as administrator, is there a decision or a moment that you are particularly proud of? This was during the George W. Bush administration, of course, or something perhaps you would wish you had done differently?
Well, I was proud of what we were able to get done in being innovative in water management and clean drinking water when we did the nutrient trading program, which was an important program that moved things forward and showed a little common sense, saying to a utility, if you need to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get the water quality, the drinking water quality to where you need it, to put to install a technology to do that, but you could pay a farmer upriver from you just a few $1,000s to redo the way he handles his manure or handles his animals that are actually causing the pollution. Mm-hmm. That makes more sense. We don't care how you get it done as long as you get the water to the right drinking water standard. And if you can do it in a way that's creative, that costs less for your ratepayers, then have at it. And that made a lot of sense and has worked very well.
Right. And in this region, that was around the Susquehanna and the Chesapeake Bay, that was a big debate. It's been a big debate for years as well. Well, Governor, final thoughts. We're out of time, and I'm getting the wrap. Is there anything that, it's great to have you here to sort of cap off my portion of this anyway, these one-on-one interviews. Are there any final thoughts as we move forward in the coming weeks and months and I guess years about the direction things are heading?
Well, I think we're, unfortunately, at the state and local level, we're doing much better. At the state and local level, because the mayors and governors have to respond to the people. They have to solve the problem. So they're doing better. But we need leadership at the federal level that says these issues are important. They're critical to our mental and physical and economic health. And we have to take them seriously and support the efforts to ensure that we have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe and open spaces that people can use to recharge themselves.
On that note, Governor Whitman, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers. In other words, you'll be able to buy the car of your choice. We will build automobiles in America again at a rate that nobody could have dreamt possible just a few years ago.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for our final panel looking at the transportation sector. Rachel will now interview Rebecca Higgins, VP of Policy at the Enos Center for Transportation. Albert, hi, welcome. Albert Gore, the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association. Pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you, welcome. And Elaine Buckberg, Senior Fellow at Harvard's Salata Institute for Climate Sustainability. Hi, welcome. And former Chief Economist at General Motors, and you know Rachel Frazin from the Hill. Take it away.
Hi, thank you guys all so much for being here. I think the first question that I want to put to the panel is, EV policy is on the one hand something that can be very partisan and as can sustainable transportation at large. On the other hand, you have Elon Musk in this very prominent role in this administration. What impact, if anything, do you think Elon Musk's position is going to have on sustainable transportation? Would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be happy. I'd be happy to take it. Well, I think Elon's impact and Tesla's impact over the last decade or decade and a half has been really positive in terms of, proving the case about electric vehicles, really demonstrating that EVs are mass market vehicles, demonstrating all the benefits beyond just emissions reductions. So I think, going forward, where we're likely to, be in a similar situation we were in a few years ago, where it's really competition and market forces that are going to drive the industry forward. At this point, I think Tesla plays a really important role there, and we have a much more informed debate, at least around EVs, and a much stronger U.S. manufacturing base for electric vehicles because of, I think, the impact of crowding in investment that Tesla's had over the last decade.
I guess I'll add, in the current role for Elon Musk and DOGE and their approach to the federal programs, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program has been frozen, continues to be frozen. That was poised and still could be poised to be a really important source of building out EV infrastructure. It's not, Tesla has their own network, so it has less of a benefit perhaps to Tesla owners and to Elon Musk's company. But That program, which was $5 billion, was provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Much of it remains unobligated, but states had been planning to spend that money and build out their infrastructure networks. And the budget that was released last week does identify that potentially as going to be rescinded. And so I think that will have the effect of delaying the build out of infrastructure that we think will provide confidence to the consumer that they can purchase electric vehicles and be able to charge that vehicle.
So first, I want to completely agree with Rebecca that of all the programs to support and policies to support EVs, NEVI is the single most catalytic in terms of our research and modeling says that charging has a really disproportionate positive impact on EV adoption. I think it's really important to keep in mind that Tesla has received extensive federal support from initial loans from the Loan Program Office to, if you look at the EVs that were eligible for the EV tax credit last year, for the purchase tax credit, I looked at this through the first 3 quarters, and 75% of the sales of those eligible vehicles were Tesla. So 75% of the EV tax credit dollars went to Teslas and buyers of Teslas last year. But in last summer at some point, Musk said that he would support the removal of that tax credit because he thought it would be more harmful to his competitors than him. So I think Musk is, by his own statements, first playing hardball with his competition, but at the same time is a demonstration of the power of EV industry development around the world.
If I could add one thing, just to add on to what you said, I think Tesla has participated in the NEVI program as well as received grants for that program and through CFI. So I think I would maybe this may be in the realm of speculation, but I would separate out his impact within the administration on freezing these programs from the general administration's approach to freezing these programs. I'm not sure that he has said he's one way or the other his feelings about NEVI and CFI, but I do know that Tesla has participated in those programs and benefited from them, and I think the programs have benefited from Tesla's participation as well as all the other companies that have participated, and agree wholeheartedly with what you all said about the importance of those programs.
Rebecca, I was wondering, can you give us an update on sort of that grant funding and also, just sustainable transportation grants more broadly? Where are we? And I recall under the last administration, there were some reports saying, they put all this money towards EV chargers, but only so many chargers have been built. Seems like only a handful. Has there been progress there? And can you give us a status update?
Sure. The program provided $5 billion when it was passed in 2021. And the majority of that was supposed to be distributed to states as formula funding. And states first had to develop plans for how they would build out that infrastructure. States have done so. Then when the Trump administration came in, though, they decided that they would relook at the state's plans, take away the approval that had been previously granted to state plans. And so no money has been spent since it has remained frozen since the administration. There was quite a balance of unexpended funds. It certainly has been obligated slower than we had hoped. I was on the Hill when we were writing those programs, and I think that the states have worked really hard to take on that role, and they've worked with the state energy offices, but it is a different role than state DOTs have historically played. Building out vehicle servicing infrastructure is just a different model than building roadways, and so I think that there was some learning that had to happen that contributed to the program deploying more slowly than we would have liked. So that's where it currently stands, and as I mentioned, it does appear that they are hoping to rescind those balances that are unobligated, and I think that would be a major hit to the program. With regard to other clean energy programs, I think the T&I committee's mark for the reconciliation bill also will rescind other aviation, low emission fuels, and other technology funding. Funding for low carbon cement and other materials, which is not counted as part of the transportation emissions, but obviously is part of, is emissions resulting from the transportation sector ultimately, because it's for building our infrastructure. And then there are neighborhood access and other programs that are focused on kind of smart mobility. Infrastructure will also be potentially rescinded. And so I think that there's a kind of across the board reductions in funding that will help with the emissions reduction.
And so to clarify, the EV charger grants are fully frozen, or what's left are frozen right now, and it seems, or do you believe that Republicans will try to rescind that via reconciliation, or what do you mean rescind? Like, who would be rescinding it?
It wasn't in the T&I committee's bill, but it was the budget from the president appears to be interested in having Congress rescind it. So it could be in a regular appropriations bill. I don't know.
Albert, I wanted to go to you and ask you about the EV tax credits that are a hot topic in reconciliation. What do you expect? Do you expect them to be sunset early? Do you expect them to be eliminated? Do you think they could stay in place? What are we looking at?
Well, it's certainly been a hot topic of debate. We've been making the case that they're incredibly important, particularly with regard to the value of the 45X production tax credit, which is centered around bringing auto manufacturing, battery manufacturing, and upstream mineral refining here to the United States. So I think there's been receptivity to that from folks that may not be so focused on electric vehicles or vehicles generally, but are incredibly focused on battery manufacturing and critical mineral production and refining. And there are over a dozen offtake agreements between U.S. mining and refining companies with U.S. automakers contingent on the value of the 30D tax credit, which is the new clean vehicle credit. I think that there's an emerging understanding of the importance of those offtake agreements, as well as things like joint ventures between, say, Ford and Ioneer, direct investments like GM's investment in Lithium Americas Thacker Pass mine, and what would happen to those if the demand signal of the 30D credit is removed right away or very quickly. That's private sector investment in U.S. mining capacity and refining capacity. It's very, very hard to replicate, and it's very, very important to new operations in the United States, particularly when you're financing projects against a commodity price that is outside of the market's control. It's generally set by China, through their own production, often below their cost to produce. So a very challenging problem, a very good solution that we have and should maintain.
I just want to add on to this. So there's a superb database that tells you where investments in EVs and batteries and other forms of clean energy are in the country, the dollars, the jobs, and the party of the member of the House. For battery investments that would be eligible for 45X, over 80% are in congressional districts currently represented by Republicans. For EV manufacturing investments, over 70%. So the politics of this may be particularly friendly to 45X.
Is this Jay Turner's database?
The big green machine.
Right. Yeah.
And so
it's a good one.
What are you hearing when you have those conversations, especially with Republicans? Are they receptive to that argument, or how have those conversations gone?
They've gone well. And I'll give one example, which is we were out in Reno recently with Congressman Mark Amodei at Redwood's site where they're doing battery recycling at Panasonic's facility, which has been 10 years on. They're making 6 million cells a day there, and it's been incredibly important to the local economy. Congressman Amodei said that the 30D and 45X credits would be a red line for him in reconciliation shortly afterwards. So, I think that's a good data point. There are a number of other members that are really receptive and I think are making the case within the conference, within the process. So, I think a lot of work still to be done.
Aline, I wanted to ask you, so as we prepare for policy changes or potential policy changes with this administration, be it, tax credits or regulation changes, what are automakers doing, if anything, to respond or to anticipate those changes?
Automakers have been clearly lobbying, and most visibly through things like the Alliance of Automotive Innovators, for retaining all of these policies. It's easy in domestic discussions to focus on EV adoption in the US, but you have to remember this is a powerful global trend, that the biggest market in the world, China, is over 25% pure battery electric vehicle at this point, in this country matched by California. That Europe is running around 15% battery electric vehicle, that every automaker sees this as the future. And frankly, it would be very costly to them to have to invest in completely different new vehicle programs for the United States to stay behind and stay in internal combustion. So they want the EV transition to happen here. And they certainly value federal support to help accelerate that process. It's incredibly investment intensive compared to just a world where it was just another internal combustion engine program. And that's before you think about other investments in increasing autonomous features or the complexity and expense of tariffs hitting automakers.
And what about regulations, as Trump, I guess, to put it in his words, prepares to undo the EV mandate? Like, are we seeing automakers, invest in fewer EVs, because they won't have to make as many?
I think there's been slowing of timelines and slowing of investments. And while no one is ever entirely explicit, and they've often blamed the consumer, I think that the transitions have often been somewhat more challenging than they've expected. They may have been able to ramp things more slowly. There have been other changes that may have reduced how much the investment they want to make for the American automakers. The UAW contracts reached in the fall of 2024 were substantially more expensive than I think anything they expected. I think that the markets somewhat changed their tolerance between show me how many EVs you're going to make and when you're going to overtake Tesla. And we'll reward you to that too. Well, I still want to see short-term profits, although I'd like to see that. And so there's been recalibration, but I don't think that changes their fundamental view on the market.
So it seems to me like this administration has been very focused on minerals, both sort of domestically and also getting minerals from abroad, including Ukraine. What impact do you think that's going to have on the transportation sector, if anything?
I think you're better
I'm happy
to
to
answer this. Yeah, supply chain is critically important, but I think that with regard to specific minerals, please go ahead.
I think, Ukraine seems to be primarily focused on rare earths, which is a, very specific issue, not necessarily specific to batteries, although it is important it is an important material for vehicles as well as many other applications. As far as securing the supply chain and moving it out of China, which I think has been a focus for many years, there are things underway. The EV industry, I think, has many years of head start here. Some of it through the demand signal in the 30D credit. 30D credit is incredibly laser focused on moving mineral content out of China first and foremost. And into FTA countries. And then similarly with battery components, moving their assembly here up to 100%, 100% is the top threshold for eligibility for the 30D credit. It has to be assembled in North America. North America is a whole other challenge right now because there are tariffs involved, but I think, we're working with the administration to make all that workable. I think there is an enormous amount of mineral resources around the world in places like South America and Australia when it comes to lithium. What we're focused on now is bringing refining capacity into the United States because so much of the refining capacity is concentrated in China. That's a very difficult thing. It's time and capital intensive. It takes years of sustained commitment and an understanding of the challenge and how to work around the financial challenges involved with a commodity market that is not necessarily set by market forces when it comes to battery materials. But I think that is one area where we see a lot of alignment in what we've heard in the executive orders and elsewhere out of the administration. And so we're hopeful to make that successful.
Just those rare earths are important in magnets that go in the drive units for EVs that are not necessary for internal combustion engine motors.
That's right.
So Albert, what I'm hearing from you might be that, it's not even so much about where the minerals are mined, it's where they're processed. Are we likely to get, large-scale mineral processing here in the United States or in our allies like there is in China? Like, is that something that is going to happen, and what can be done, if anything, to make that happen?
Well, there are several things happening now, projects in the pipeline or coming online. So, I mean, both Thacker Pass and Rhyolite Ridge, being Lithium Americas and Ioneers, have processing. So, LPO has been played a really important role in those projects. Permitting timelines are incredibly important, but also, again, sort of the fundamental challenge is they're incredibly capital intensive up front, and then you have a certain timeline before you're producing, and you're expecting to sell into a market that has a commodity price that is usually basically controlled by China's overproduction or the price at which they put products into the market at a given time. So how do we pull that material into the United States? Tax credits have been an incredibly powerful tool in doing that. And so that is a central case for maintaining them for a meaningful period of time in order to allow those projects to come online.
So, Alina, I wanted to ask you, I feel like we're seeing a lot of consumer backlash to Tesla because of Musk's politics, as often people who may have been predisposed to buy a Tesla or people who are concerned about the environment, who might vote Democrat, who don't like what this administration is doing. As people trade in or sell those vehicles, are they replacing them with EVs or are they replacing them with gas-powered cars?
So I think overwhelmingly, EV drivers generally don't want to go back. They love the smoothness, the quietness. They love the not needing to go to the gas station if they can charge at home. But, we were talking earlier about the potential change in the policy landscape, and I really want to talk about some estimates that we've made of how these different policy changes could change EV adoption and the fiscal benefits. And so forgive me, but I just think that's really important for this Hill-based audience. We have modeled the impact of 8 different scenarios of potential changes in federal policy supporting EVs, and how that would impact EV adoption and the fiscal benefits. On one hand, the single biggest negative impact on EV adoption would be taking away all 3 EV tax credits, new, used, and commercial, which hits leases. That would take down EV adoption at 2030 from a baseline current policy forecast of 48% to 42%, but it yields 97.5% of the savings out of any combination you can get of saving about $168 billion over a 10-year budget window. If you were to taking away NEVI, saves $2.6 billion if you sort of stop what it's doing. If you left in place those EV tax credits, it would save about 12 by fewer tax credits. Little, but would take away 3% percentage points of EV sales in 2030 just for a few billion. If you took away everything in IRA, everything in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the California waiver that's clearly at great risk, You're down 16 percentage points of EV sales in 2030. You're down from 48% baseline forecast to 32%. So the combination has nonlinear accelerating effects. At the same time, there's a note of optimism here because you'd still be at 32%. So in 6 years, we'd still quadruple EV sales because the transition has many forms of inherent momentum.
Well, I think that we are just about at time. Thank you guys all for a wonderful discussion. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and our panelists. I want to thank all of our fabulous guests this morning and our audience here in the room. Thank you for being here, as well as the thousands of people who tuned in on Fast TV channel on thehill.com and elsewhere. And thanks to our sponsor, Climate Power, for supporting today's program. Once again, I just want to give a special shout out to Rachel Friesen, whose book, Poisoning the Well, is available for sale now. I'm Mike Vaccaro for The Hill and News Nation. Please enjoy lunch on your way out, and thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.